actually like a buffer. So when I click go live, it might get that last thing you said. So we'll see.
We will find out, won't we? Great.
Did I edit off the one on the last one? I don't think I did.
Which YouTube?
When you showed your mug.
Oh, that.
I figure whatever.
Well, our 13 live stream watchers will have to correct us.
Oh no, I think we typically get what 100, 120 views, something like that.
Oh, nice.
I don't know how many like
Like
of 2
live
seconds.
though, or after the fact?
No, live is well 3 right now. Look at that. Boom. Are they going to check in? They're going to post a comment down below. Oh, we should do that whole thing that they do on YouTube, right? Be sure to subscribe, click the bell, and then click the like. And then share this link with your friends.
It helps us with the algorithms.
Share them on. It helps with the algorithms. The algorithm is already
The algorithm is the new cloud. What's the cloud? No one knows.
No, it's the big guy in the sky,
right?
That decides what you get to see and hear and touch and taste and feel.
Watched They Live again the other day.
Did you? I've never seen that one.
It's a classic. It's a documentary at this point.
Who did that?
John Carpenter.
Oh yeah, 98.
Yeah. No, was it 98? I thought it was 89.
88. Excuse me.
88. Okay, there we go. I was going to say because Roddy Piper. No.
Well, Carpenter was basically done by the 90s, wasn't he?
The movie Vampires kind of finished him off, working with James Wood. He said after he worked with James Woods that he wouldn't work again.
Just because how terrible it was?
Yeah, it was apparently it was hyper conflictual.
As far
filming.
as what it should look like. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
James Wood is like in that class of like supposedly conservative Hollywood people.
Mm-hmm. That's true. But yeah. And there's conservative and then there's being a jerk. I think sometimes contrarians are mistaken for conservatives. Kind of like Michael Malice, actually.
Malice, good example.
Yeah, he's obviously not.
He's not. No,
conservative, but he's mistaken for one because he's kind of a satirist and
Scott
he's an
Adams
anarchist.
Is that way?
Yeah, Scott Adams.
Same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think more than Paul. I think often what happens. I'm not recording, by the way, the audio.
I haven't yet either.
I think that's what happens is
Pre-show banter.
People say that about me. They're like, "Well, you're a Republican." I'm like, "I'm not. I'm definitely not Republican. I've never voted Republican, so I'm not a Republican."
I mean,
I don't.
You could vote for Trump, but that didn't make you a Republican.
No,
because they didn't support him.
That's like people that go to a Lutheran church because they agree with the theology, but they're not really down with the polity.
Or actually, it would be more like people going to an Anglican church where they have a Lutheran pastor, effectively.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
In secret, in hiding, or just because they don't care.
Yeah.
I'm a Lutheran, but like, why would I leave this church? They're paying me money.
Right, exactly. So I think that's part of the problem, though, is that with the politicization of life in this country, you have to be categorized as either blue or red, or liberal versus conservative, or woke versus extremist. You can't keep pushing further and further out towards the boundaries.
Why would you want to do that to polarize people like that?
Well, one, it's easier to predict their behavior, and then it's easier to control them. Because the more extreme someone is in their
divide
behavior,
and conquer. Yep.
The easier it is to control them because hey, if I just throw this at them, they're going to bounce off the walls.
Put them in a box, yeah.
Right. This is why, as a parent, if you're a responsible parent, you teach your children to control their emotions. Because you recognize that no good decision is made when you're emotional.
It's not just, it's not just parent, right? I mean, it's a military commander, pastor, teacher.
Well, yeah, supposedly. That's
well, yeah. I mean, I've seen classrooms that are disorderly.
Last week on the fact that your feelings are the problem. When we come to these,
yeah, you're enslaved to them.
Yeah, you're enslaved to your feelings, and you've been taught to be a slave to your feelings. It's on purpose, but people.
It's almost like it's a good thing, Do whatever makes you feel good.
Right. Your feelings determine truth for you. Your feelings determine what is morally right or wrong for you. And since feelings are like wild monkeys, you have basically indoctrinated someone down to the most granular level of individuality. That because my feelings determine reality for me, and since everybody else's feelings are different than mine, even those that are sympathetic towards me, it ultimately reduces me to just a grain of sand.
You've been domesticated.
100%. And it's basically been done without any show of force.
Yeah,
You're doing it to yourself. You're a tyrant to yourself by way of your emotions.
I know you never read it, even though I sent it to you, because you saw the word Gramsci at the top and you decided that was a waste of time.
Yeah. Having read
But
him.
this isn't Gramsci himself. This is actually just the way Gramsci has been used. So you take somebody who's an idiot, and then you get a bunch of idiots using him.
Yeah.
And it was written by a Roman priest, actually, who just kind of walks through, you know, what these different kinds of revolution. And now the what do you want to say? The revolution, the cultural revolution, which is really what we're seeing, right? Try to change the culture. But like I posted on social this morning, you know what? The only court that actually matters is not the highest court in the land is the court of public opinion.
Correct.
And I don't think that. I mean, that's always been true. You have the people, the consent of the governed,
The mob.
You know,
Yeah.
the mob, whoever's yelling the loudest anyway, or has the most guns or whatever it is, right? That's the rule, right? So how do you do this? You pass a mandate. It doesn't have to be lawful or not. It doesn't matter. And then you you utilize the press to change public opinion about the mandate,
Right.
to militarize the people for it ultimately. And then it doesn't matter. The court has to just say, well, the people.
Right.
It's the same reason why you have to have a bunch of people get a particular medical treatment. Because if you can get a majority of people to have it, then they can actually say, well, a majority of people actually agree. And it doesn't really matter what the data says.
Right. 9 out of 10 doctors agree that smoking cigarettes is healthy for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or what was it? Everything. Cocaine, the whole deal.
Anything. Yeah. Well, that's the two-pronged attack on a mass population is compulsory education and the media.
Which
the
is
compulsory education part of it
indoctrination.
raises you up to this is the way you're supposed to think. This is your behavior patterns. And then the media simply reinforces that message throughout your life. It's almost like in the church we complain about people leaving church after they get done with confirmation, and the underlying
They're indoctrinated.
the underlying point is they think that once you're 13, 14, 15, you've been taught the faith and therefore you're done learning the faith. Now you can leave and go off and do whatever. Versus you and I who are saying catechization is a lifelong pursuit. It's a lifelong discipline. That rings so hollow. It's so dissonant to people who for generations, again, have been raised in this kind of compulsory school mentality in the church. Well, I graduated. I got confirmed. I graduated.
Right, but that's naive, right? Because you graduate from one school, which is, you know, the day school, into, you know, maybe a collegiate life, which is another school, but into, like you said, the media. The media is just continued schooling.
Yeah. But they don't realize that. They think that the media is benign. It's just delivering information, that they're not being manipulated. You hear this constantly with people who quote Fox or MSNBC or CNN or whatever. Well, why would they lie to us? What reason do they have to lie to us? Because they know if they get caught lying, we turn off the show. It's like they're lying to you constantly, and you don't turn it off because you've been indoctrinated.
I spend my time, a lot of my social posts just compare and contrast last year to this year, or two posts from, like I had two posts from Reuters on the same day. One is, you know, how dare what's the Florida governor guy, you know, go against the mandates, and he's violating the 10th Amendment, and then you have Biden who's not violating the 10th Amendment, who's doing the very thing.
Correct.
And you're like, wait a minute.
But if you're not taught the Constitution in school, and
it's literacy, right? I mean,
exactly, it's social literacy. As a citizen, you're an illiterate citizen because you don't know the amendments. You don't know what the Bill of Rights is. You don't know how that relates to the
Fourth
Constitution.
Amendment, search and seizure when it comes to medical.
But you then don't understand, you don't know, for example, let's say Common Sense by Thomas Paine. You're not familiar with the works of Thomas Paine. You're not familiar with Madison and his speeches before, like the Virginia Congress.
Well, that's why I posted today, you know, they were all
Madison
written under
papers.
a pseudonym, but the Anti-Federalist papers. Okay,
And
you
the
might know the Federalist papers, but you haven't read the anti ones, which Madison and Hamilton, and obviously Patrick Henry was there.
You know,
because I got a Facebook fact check that said, well, Patrick Henry never said that. Well, of course he didn't. He did it under a pseudonym.
Yeah.
And you're like, can I even argue with it? No, I can't even argue with Facebook.
No.
So here's the Anti-Federalist paper where it says it, okay? And it's credited to Brutus. Sorry.
Okay.
Who's Brutus? You're right. Not the guy back in Rome. It's obviously
Algorithms.
And yes, the scholarly consensus is not unanimous as to who wrote that one in particular. Fine. It's like, but there were
Yep.
people who were against the Federalist approach because people even who signed the Declaration of Independence and even helped draft the Constitution.
Yeah.
Because they saw the kind of things that we saw today. But those have been all set into the bottom bin, back of the drawer. Don't read those.
And then you vilify, you marginalized and you disenfranchise those who cited, like you just pointed out. And how do you do that? Just 1,000 little pinpricks, 1,000, just death by 1,000 goldfish bites, just mouthing you. And so you become so frustrated that you are like a pigeon on a chessboard. You're just kicking over the pieces. You're like, fine, to hell with it. Since this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I'll just check out. I'll get out and just leave.
I'll check it out. I'll either check out and leave, or I'll put everything on blast. And again, now we're back to where I started.
Yeah, you put it on blast, and the algorithm says, this guy is a guy that needs to be pigeonholed.
Exactly. So then we'll just suspend your account for 30 days. And then,
or not even that. They'll just
or eventually delete you.
I had somebody note that the algorithm got confused and started giving them like the complete polar opposite of who they are in like the advertisements and everything.
Yeah.
You've had that happen. It's like, why are they advertising all this stuff to me?
Yeah.
I was like, what did I say?
No, I love doing that.
Do they can tell what your sexual preference is by the way that your phone swishes in your pocket? They can listen to the microphone and they can tell based off your gait, basically.
Sure. I believe that's called profiling.
There's no limit to this stuff.
No.
There's no limit.
But that's the tipping point, and it's too late now to pull back. It's too late to downshift. We've reached a critical kind of a terminal velocity when it comes to innovation and technology now. And there's no pulling back from it. That's why I keep pushing harder and harder for people to take into consideration. Just consider that we're devolving, we're not evolving. That we're not progressing, we're regressing.
I think the tool is still, itself is neutral, but it's how it's utilized. So, I mean, you can correct its utilization.
No, I don't think you can anymore. I think we're past that.
You don't think so?
No, we're past that. Because the AI is taken over at this point. It's just people plugging, they're just pulling levers at this point when it comes to the innovation, the technology, and the AI, especially with predictable programming. It's a Pandora's box. It's out of their control because it's learning at such a quick rate. And
so should we just go watch The Matrix again, huh?
Yeah. Resurrection doesn't look bad except for the fact that
it's just a recap, though.
Seems that way.
I wonder about that. I thought this
it's kind of like The Force Awakens.
Yeah, I wondered if that's what they're going for, or if that's actually the psyop that they're actually playing us like we're in the Matrix, and it's like, oh, we're just watching the same movie except they're young again.
I don't know if they're clever enough to do that, based on not only the second and third Matrix movies.
Yeah, that's true.
Again, I still refuse to acknowledge. That's an alternate.
I acknowledge
universe.
them. I just acknowledge
they're
them as
terrible.
The second one is entertaining. The third one's terrible, pretty much all around.
But everything after that has just been a dumpster fire. Narratively,
there were a couple of the
it's a dumpster
Animatrix sketches that were pretty good.
Yeah, but they didn't do those.
Those came. Well, they wrote them, but they came after. They came after the first movie,
right?
Didn't they, or was it the second? I don't remember.
I can't remember either. Maybe between the second and the third.
That's probably right.
But the point being is that if you just look at the movies like Jupiter Rising or whatever that movie was, Cloud Atlas wasn't terrible. I watched it.
I thought the premise was interesting.
Yeah, the premise was interesting. The execution was.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, we're going to start over, except Neo actually didn't start over. He goes into the new version, the resurrected version, the repeat.
You mean the new normal Matrix?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and all these like patriot people who are like, oh yeah, look, they're going to acknowledge all the things we've been talking about being red pill. They're like, no, Lana does not care about you patriots. I'm sorry.
No. Once you realize the original Matrix movie was about transitioning,
correct.
It was her justifying. Well, it was about him justifying his sex change.
Don't dead name.
I refuse. I refuse.
He! Exclamation point. He.
Chromosomes don't lie.
Has a girl name, but sorry. Girl hair, I guess.
John Wayne's real name is Ginger.
No way.
Yeah. John Wayne is a character from a Steinbeck film, or a Steinbeck novel called Our Father.
I started watching, what was it? What's this show? Oh, Community, right? So
Yeah.
Vaughn, I don't know if it's his first name or his last name. He just goes
Yeah,
by
right,
Vaughn.
it's just Vaughn. Yeah, it's always Vaughn. Yeah. It's a great show, actually. I mean,
Oh man, I've been
for all of
laughing.
Dan Harmon's sin, it's a good show.
Well, I think this is before he devolved.
It just popped.
Because I mean, you've seen that with Rick and Morty, right? I mean, it went
Oh yeah,
downhill pretty quick.
yeah. The shine wore off Rick and Morty pretty quick for me. Like by the end of the Szechuan sauce episode.
Yeah, I watched about 30 episodes in a row,
Yeah,
and then you're like,
And-
I don't know what just happened
Yeah.
to me, and then
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah. I never felt good when I got done watching an episode. I laughed, but I didn't feel good about myself when I got done watching it.
No, but there's a place for that.
Yeah,
You know, that's
called,
that critique.
called Rick and Morty.
That critique of just the utter depravity of
Mm-hmm.
humanity, and
Yeah.
then utilizing technology
Well, there you go.
to do whatever you want.
And maybe
Daddy-
that's the finer point to make about all this is that when it comes to innovation and technology, it's always going to drive downward, not upward. We call it upward. We call it a progress or an evolution upward, but human nature is such, at least for us, human nature with original sin is such that it will always be a downward trajectory. So what we call progress is actually regress as far as God's concerned. Because like with the internet and with the dehumanization of individuals and society, it's taking us further away from our creatureliness and therefore our creator.
Right. Yeah.
And as life becomes even more stressful and anxious, as people become sicker and sicker, both mentally, physically, and emotionally, when you're offered augmented reality, you're going to jump at it because it's an escape.
Yeah. I guess we talked about that last time. We took a week off, obviously. Maybe we should start recording. We want to record.
All right, let's do it. Go ahead. I got it.
All right, good.
I'm dotted up. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 220. 218. Episode 218. And we are your hosts, Christopher Gillespie,
Chilling and willing, maxing and relaxing.
and I'm Donovan Riley. We are going to dive back into Kolakovic, the Prophet, today, from the book Christian Dissidents by a guy named Dreher. He wrote another book
Who,
called The Benedictine Option that a lot of people loved, a lot of people didn't like, and there's some people that like it more nowadays than they did when it first came out.
Right, and I think this was probably the same book. You see the warning signs coming, but you don't necessarily know how prescient your book's going to be until kind of after the fact. You realize how useful it's going to be because I'm sure it took him years to compose this.
Sure.
Get all the interviews done and whatnot. So
Yeah.
and research.
But we covered this in the last 2 episodes.
No, just one.
Just the one we chopped it. We didn't chop it. Okay.
Nope, didn't chop it up.
But we ended on page 7 of the book, The New Totalitarianism. So that's where we're going to pick up today. We'll then use that to segue into the gentleness of soft totalitarianism, which in this country isn't soft. For
It's like a warm blanket or a big cuddly pillows
that's wrapped around your head
and strangling you.
and strangling you. So this is the new totalitarianism. And if you remember from last time, Father Kolakovic had been traveling around essentially creating home churches, house churches,
That's right.
to prepare for the inevitable spread of communism into Eastern Europe, because he recognized the Nazis were not the imminent threat, the preeminent threat to Eastern Europe and Russia. It was Stalinism. It was the Soviet regime under Stalin. And history proves that Kolakovic was 100% accurate on that one. Everyone's like, oh, Hitler, he's a monster. It's like Stalin made him look like he was a part of the C Squad.
It is interesting that, like in our day, I think Christians don't see, pastors especially in our experience, don't see, not everything, but a lot of what's happening is attacks on the gathering together of Christians around God's word.
Yeah.
You're like, they don't they don't want any kind of social gathering, and the church is one of the significant ones because we actually talk about important things. It's not just like we're watching a football game or something.
I think churches that aren't attacked are not attacked for that reason.
Well, yeah, because what damage are they doing?
They're not relevant and they're not vital. Because we used to joke around, the church is always 20 years behind culture.
Yeah.
It's always playing catch up. And I think that's true to a certain extent, even to this day, because you and I have talked about different Christian organizations, different groups, both youth and adult, still chasing after things that happened a generation ago when we were in seminary.
I would say our tradition is about 20 years behind American evangelicalism, which is then about 20 years behind tradition. Right. So we end up being like 40 to 50 years behind.
So all we're saying is that by 2045-ish, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is going to be on top of vaccination mandates.
That's what I posted on social this morning. I said, ask me again in 20 years what the battle against the coronavirus, was like after we withdraw finally.
Yeah, exactly. Once we draft our opinion, our theological opinion on this.
We'll waste a lot of money and a lot of time and people, obviously, and livelihood on it, and then we'll just realize, that was all a big waste of time. Here, have a few $1 trillion worth of supplies, and we're just going to get out now.
Right, exactly. Eat your food paste and like it.
Comes from the thing in the wall, in the ceiling, right? Hanging down.
Selling green, baby. So I pointed out to my kids last night in Australia, they now have implemented this plan to replicate what happens in The Fifth Element, where you have to put your hands against the wall and your face in front of the camera to prove that it's you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're doing that.
Oh, good night.
Everybody has to have it, so when they call you, you have to answer and show facial
I saw that. Where was
proof that you're in your home.
It wasn't New South Wales. Was that Victoria? I can't remember which province.
Does it matter anymore at this point? It's just
they're not all on board. Not everybody's on board
yet.
Okay.
Yet.
I'm just saying, Australia has like disparate geography and provinces and political affiliations.
It's like the size of Iowa.
What map are you looking at?
The map of America. Hello. I don't know.
It's all your Mercator. What do they call it? Mercator lines and the projection. The geometric distortion. The projection.
It's a projection, all right. No, actually, just last week. So it's funny you mentioned that total rabbit hole, but I saw an actual map, like a topographically accurate, a geographically accurate map of the different countries and stuff versus.
I think I sent
Mercator.
it to you, didn't I?
Was that you?
Yeah, that's why I'm talking about it.
I had to explain this to a friend the other day too. He sends me stuff. He's like, "Did you read what I sent you?" I'm like, "Dude, you're my friend, so I'm going to share this with you." I get like 24 articles a day sent to me, and that's not including podcasts and videos.
Right.
It's not that I don't
expect you to recognize or to acknowledge everything I send you. No, it's fine. So like Greenland is actually the size of Iowa, but on the map it looks like the size of like
it's enormous. Yeah,
Australia or something.
It's fantastic. So why did then Father Kolakovic, who started these essentially home churches over and against the institution's wishes in places like Czechoslovakia, he did it because he recognized the threat of the Soviet regime to the people and the priests in particular, local priests, that you needed to take them out because the state must become the voice of God.
Yeah, destroy the family, destroy the church.
Correct.
Destroy
so that's the premise.
Society.
So for totalitarianism to really sink its roots into the culture, it has to destroy the church and the family. And then it's essentially free to do what it wants to do.
Yeah, and it doesn't actually have to actually annihilate it. It just needs to divide.
Marginalize it. Yeah.
Marginalize, divide, or at least bring it into some kind of compliance.
Well, and like you see that in this country over the last 5 or 6 generations, how irrelevant the church has become to the daily life of people in general. Like the church doesn't really have a voice in the public square anymore. No. And even when it does, it's not really regarded. And then when you look at Christians and you look at the influence of the church, the local church on the life of that Christian, that too is significant compared to what it used to be. It's marginal at best.
I wanted to share this with you. It was a sermon from a pastor here, and it was they had a service on the bicentennial, July 4th, 1976. And the person I buried yesterday, she had requested a copy of it. And so then the family's like, "Oh, we thought you might be interested in this. I don't know, because we know you're kind of, interested in politics." I don't know what that means. And
It means
kind
they
of a morbid
disagree with you.
curiosity. Anyway, it was interesting how he preached it because on the one hand, he wouldn't agree with us on a number of things. But on the other hand, he did say, look, there's some significant intrusions of the state into the life of the church. And he acknowledged those in this sermon. I'm like, this is 1976, right? So
Right.
it's a lifetime for me away. That was before I was born, actually. And it's like, he warned the congregation, don't let it happen, And I'm like, no,
No, let it
okay.
happen. Yeah.
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 Well, I think it's the slow boil, right? The frog in the pot.
Sure.
You just kind of
So-
nip away at things, chip away, go around the edges.
Right.
Yeah.
So why did Father Kolakovic know what was coming to the people of Central Europe? Well, he was not supernaturally gifted, at least not that we know. Rather, he had studied Soviet communism intensely to prepare for missionary work in Russia and understood how the Soviets thought and behaved. This is such a key point because Hackworth talks about this in Steal My Soldier's Heart about Vietnam, is that the reason that the U.S. military failed is because in their hubris, they thought, well, we have bombs. We have bombs. Like, they
Or
can't
that
beat
they were
us.
dealing with Westerners, basically.
And that the generals who didn't have really clear mission parameters thought to themselves, well, these are savages that live in the jungle. They don't, they live off rice and bugs. How hard can it be to defeat them? And Hackworth's point was, well, they've been here for over 1,000 years being invaded, and they repel every single invading force.
Right.
So maybe we should learn from them their tactics, then become better at them than their own tactics. And that's how we'll beat them. And Hackworth did this then with this base he was given and actually became wildly successful to the point where the Department of Defense wanted him to write a manual on how to do this. So he did. And then it was published and everyone ignored it because it violated orthodoxy.
Yeah. I mean, how many
Which then led
episodes
to
did
him
Jocko
essentially-
do on that? He did like 10, something?
Quite a lot. Well, he did About Face and then he did Steal My Soldier's Heart, 2 separate series. But
Oh, that's right. I was thinking of About Face. Right.
it's ultimately what drove Hackworth to leave the military and go and basically become an expatriate in Australia because he committed the ultimate sin is he broke ranks and went on TV and said this war will be
right.
over by 1975 and we will lose and Saigon will fall. And he was right. But he learned something that the others refused to learn, which is these people have been here for a long time. And as they themselves said, we're willing to sacrifice 1,000 of our soldiers for one of yours because we're not trying to win the war of numbers. We're trying to break your will.
Well, and you can't count the cost unless you actually know what war you're fighting,
Correct.
right? And who you're
Right.
fighting against.
Right. 3 out of 4 generals after Vietnam, it was like 78 or 80. 3 out of 4 generals polled said they did not actually know why they were in Vietnam, like what the goal was.
Well, that's why I brought up the battle of the coronavirus against the coronavirus, right? This fight against the coronavirus. You're like, I don't think you know what you're actually fighting. You don't know how these viruses operate. We don't even necessarily know where this particular one, its origin. We have suspicions. Can't say on YouTube, I suppose. But that all actually does have a bearing on whether or not it's a battle you can even fight.
Right.
With and what tools you're going to use and what's going to be appropriate measures. But since we can't have that conversation, we just have to fight. We have to fight.
Right.
And just blindly rush in.
Right.
Then you can't do a reasonable threat assessment basically, and say, well, maybe we should just let it do its thing because it's actually not causing that much harm or whatever.
But that's the American way, is to overwhelm it with money and superior power.
Where's that expression come from? Fools rush in.
Yeah. But that's what we do. We just rush in with overwhelming force and just
Where angels fear to tread. Is that how it works?
something like that.
It's a proverb.
Fools rush in where angels fear to tread.
Written by Alexander Pope in his 1711 poem, An Essay on Criticism. There you go.
So he studied the communists. That's the point. If you want to understand the enemy, you have to study the enemy's tactics. You have to out-G the G, as Hackworth says. You have to out-guerrilla the guerrillas. And this, in my opinion, is where the church has failed miserably, is that we refuse to acknowledge sin, death, and Satan and the
Right.
tactics that they use. Instead, we condemn them. We point at them and we're like, oh, that's bad. Don't do that. But we haven't dug down deep enough to ask, but why are they doing that in the first place? And why are they so successful?
Right.
When I'm tempted with sin, why is it that Satan is so successful in how he tempts me that I fall for it. Even
Yeah.
though I know what he's doing, I still fall for it. Rather than just say, condemn it, hey, that's evil, don't do that. It's like saying, just say no to drugs. That didn't work for me. I don't know.
It's not as if the Lord doesn't prepare you for this. I mean, you've got basically 2/3 of the text of the scriptures are just examples of the way that sin breaks out in life and how the devil tempts you to that.
Right.
Yeah.
And kind of explains the root cause.
Over and over and over.
Over and over again in various ways.
Yeah.
But we don't look into the human heart because we lack the fortitude and the bravery to confront ourselves. Just the truth about ourselves.
Well, and that's what I was talking, as we're reading.
We're innately predisposed to give in to temptation.
That's why I've been reading through 1 Samuel with the kids, and it's a lot. It's not quite as intense as say Judges, but you're reading through this.
It's pretty intense.
It's pretty intense. Saul legitimately wants to kill David, and then he wants to kill his own son. Then he kind of comes around, but then he's murderous again, and you're like, that the adults are thinking in the room are thinking, this is not appropriate for children. And you're like, except this is actually our nature. Yeah. Right. I mean, we can be David, we can be Saul, and we have the same capacities towards evil, and we need to be serious about that, right? Because otherwise, we don't actually.
Well, we've seen this the last years that I don't have access to the kind of power and influence that David does, so I can only dream about it. But when given a little bit of power to control who can come in my store or who I'm going to serve, you've seen how people have reacted.
Right.
By and large, poorly.
Yeah, agreed.
They've turned on their neighbors, and some people that have been, their customers for years, and then they turn on them. We saw this with doctors.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. It is really remarkable what happens when you give people a little bit of power, what they will do with it, and how it exposes their true nature.
Well, and it turns a neighbor into an enemy.
Correct. Very quickly. And so rather than look at the root cause of that, which we can't do anymore because we're incapable of thinking metaphysically.
You mean that we're fighting against powers and principalities in the heavenly places and not flesh and blood? Yeah.
Or to even talk about human nature objectively. We can't even do that anymore. That's just the way it is.
Right. Or if we do it in categories that are foreign to the scripture, like, with Gnostic terms, for example.
Yeah. Well, I had my daughter watch Idiocracy for the first time the other night because she's going to be 15 soon, so she gets it. And she watched. She's like, that wasn't funny. I'm like,
not anymore.
Why wasn't it funny? She goes, it's too real. I'm like, yeah, when he made it, everyone laughed at it.
Yeah, it was complete satire. It was like watching Alex Jones 2 years ago. Yeah. You're like, he's a nut. This is hilarious.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, well, shoot. Not so funny anymore.
If he improved his delivery, I might listen. So the point is, learn the tactics of your enemy.
Oh, you mean the yelling at the camera part?
That part of it, yeah.
Wearing tinfoil hats and masks.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a showman, right?
He is a showman, but he doesn't laugh at himself. He makes fun of himself. He mocks himself, but he doesn't laugh at himself. And laughing at yourself is disarming.
I think it's because he knows it's true. There's truth.
Well, he's emotionally invested.
He's not only emotionally invested, but I think he's gone over the cliff, right?
Yeah.
With
a while ago,
drinking and everything else.
So, learn their tactics. He studied communism to understand how they behave, how they think.
Oh, and I was going to point out something with this. Dan Van Voris on his the show that I edit. What's that one? Christian History Almanac. He had a thing about when Screw Tape Letters was printed, and then C.S. Lewis was on the cover of Time magazine, and the article was like basically taking him to task for like getting into the head of the demons, right? Yeah. I was like, we talked about the pushback, but I never knew where it was. It was in Time magazine. Yeah. At least that's one of the places. And so you can go and see, like,
I've read that before.
Screw Tape Letters is really helpful, insightful, again, into human nature. Yes, it's in the mouth of the demons, but it's just the demons confessing what we can see in the scriptures about ourselves, right? Yeah. And he just puts it in a colloquial kind of way with through this conversation between this.
Nice if somebody updated
demon.
that. It'd be kind of fun.
Well, and there's things in there that are that I'd never understood, but today I do, right? Because it's like because Lewis was very perceptive. Yeah. His context is probably more similar to ours now than it was, say, 20 years ago when I first read it.
Right. Yeah. Well, it It wasn't terribly difficult to read through that again while writing my book, and then just slightly shift the narrative.
Yeah, you just change the facts and figures.
It wasn't
basically.
that far off, though. It wasn't like you were reading it like, I wonder how this would relate to today. It was like, nah, that's pretty binary at this point.
Right, and so that's the point when it comes to when you're talking about totalitarianism. It just changes shape.
Yeah.
But the overall, overarching, I guess, philosophy, if you want to call it that, or theory, is the same.
Yeah.
Because it's driven by the same human heart.
Right.
Effectively. Yeah.
War never changes.
War never changes. No.
So he could read the geopolitical signs of the times. And as a priest who had been organizing Catholic resistance to the Nazi version of totalitarianism, he had on-the-ground experience with clandestine combat against monstrous ideology. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Today's survivors of Soviet communism are, in their way, our own Kolakoviches, warning us of a coming totalitarianism, a form of government that combines political authoritarianism with an ideology that seeks to control all aspects of life. I mean...
But copyright... Sorry.
Your freedom doesn't matter.
Copyright 2020. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
So, totalitarianism. Weird. A form of government that combines political authoritarianism with an ideology that seeks to control all aspects of life. This totalitarianism won't look like the USSR's. It's not establishing itself through hard means like armed revolution, or enforcing itself with gulags. Rather, it exercises control, at least initially, in soft forms. This totalitarianism is therapeutic. It masks its hatred of dissenters from its utopian ideology in the guise of helping and healing.
Do your part.
It's for the good of everybody.
Yeah.
It's for public health.
It's a public health. You know who coined that phrase? Drug companies.
Drug companies did.
Yeah. Okay.
To grasp the threat of totalitarianism, you just have to be alive today. But to the book, it's important to understand the difference between it and simple authoritarianism. So, before we dive into authoritarianism, here's a question.
Okay.
Obviously, Kolakovic thought that it was the responsibility of the Christian church to address it, not just from the pulpit, but in act. Like he's organizing house churches. Well,
Right.
This is,
This is not just ideas.
correct. And we've talked about spiritual cowardice before. And I wonder if in the present tense, that's why the churches are silent. By and large, they're silent on this matter. They don't preach against totalitarianism. They don't define it. They don't preach against it. They don't point it out because they have not bothered to learn the enemy's tactics.
Right, except isn't that the form of all idolatry, is to supplant the actual one who has total authority over you, which is God? So it's just other gods taking its place?
Yeah.
Taking its place? I don't know. I was thinking about warfare in general, as we were talking about, and tactics. I don't know who coined the phrase. It's William S. Lind. He's talked about the generations of warfare and that we're in fifth generation warfare, which is non-kinetic, right? So it's interesting. I don't know if Dreher had this in his mind, but non-kinetic military actions such as social engineering, misinformation, cyber attacks, along with emerging technologies such as AI and fully autonomous systems. It's the war described by Daniel Abbott as a war of information and perception.
Yeah.
And you look at that and you're like, that actually isn't that the devil's primary tactics?
Yeah.
Wasn't that how it was at the beginning?
Right.
And now our earthly warfare has come around to recognize, hey, this satanic demonic style is actually very effective and convincing and changing people.
Right. It's all profit, no pain for the people that are seeking to profit off of it. Again, they don't have to sacrifice for it. They don't have to run the risk of a counterinsurgency or an invasion or even losing. Because again, if they can make a mass population predictable and controllable, if they can imprison you in your own mind, they don't have to fire a shot because they've already won. And they're going to profit off that exponentially because of that.
Well, that's why I said that the only court that really matters in the end is the court of public opinion.
Yeah.
And so how do you manipulate public opinion so that their verdict is the verdict you want?
Well,
Right.
you scare them and you make them insecure.
This would be a good time. I don't think we've ever recommended this on the show, but to go watch the Shadowgate documentary, 1 and 2 at least. And I don't know how much of it's true. I mean, that's always the problem with these, self-made documentaries. But it was funded by InfoWars, so
Take it for what's worth.
well, except InfoWars dropped him before it got published. So and then she got thrown in jail and da 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 da.
Yeah, but Millie seems to be more right than InfoWars does.
She knows something. But yeah, we watch Bergie's stuff in there, and it's interesting just because we know this is all true, that they're manipulating us through social media.
Yeah.
Except he's going
you and I know
back.
this.
He's going back a generation. You see how they've been doing this a lot longer than what you thought, and that's where it's
you
really
have Operation
interesting to watch.
Mockingbird, you have DARPA. I mean,
Correct.
on and on it goes.
Yeah, who was part of Operation Mockingbird? Oh, Larry Elder.
Yeah.
Look at that.
But don't listen to me when I say they're just switching chairs to keep us distracted.
They're all on the same team.
Of course they are. So what is authoritarianism? Authoritarianism is what you have when the state monopolizes political control. That is mere dictatorship. Bad, certainly, but totalitarianism is much worse. According to Hannah Arendt, the foremost scholar of totalitarianism, a totalitarian society is one in which an ideology seeks to displace all prior traditions and institutions with the goal of bringing all aspects of society under control of that ideology. A totalitarian state is one that aspires to nothing less than defining and controlling reality. Truth,
Bill-
yeah,
No, go ahead.
truth is whatever the rulers decide it is. As Arendt has written, wherever totalitarianism has ruled, it has begun to destroy the essence of man. As part of its quest to define reality, a totalitarian state seeks not just to control your actions, but also your thoughts and emotions. The ideal subject of a totalitarian state is someone who has learned to love Big Brother.
Oh, there's a reference, huh?
There you go.
Pretty obvious one.
I mean, there's nothing really to add to that,
No.
other than the church for a number of years was that. It was that thing. It was, in the Christendom, in late medieval Europe, for example, the church was the authority. It was authoritarian. Your
Yeah.
identity was whatever the church
I guess
determined.
not in a negative way.
I would
Depends on
argue-
which church, I suppose.
I was going to say, I'd argue against that. That's the whole purpose for the Reformation. But you remember the Pope's warning to Luther was, you're going to break the church into a million pieces. And he was right.
Mm-hmm. He was.
That's the problem with freedom, though, is that when you step out of line, when you break away from the mob and you're on your own, you are wandering blindly, to quote Camus, because you're free.
Right.
And therefore, you're going to trip, you're going to fall, you're going to get hurt, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to sin. And I think this is, again, why people by nature lean into authoritarian style leadership, is because it alleviates the need for you to take responsibility for your choices and then accept the consequences. So give them to someone else
And let them control you.
and let them control you. That's why I think the term elite is in itself a false flag, because it creates this idea in your mind that the people that are doing this to you are better than you.
Right.
They're not elite, they're psychopaths. And they should be treated as such.
Well,
But
they're
again,
elite
if
psychopaths. They're really good ones.
They are exceptionally good psychopaths. But the point again is that
And sociopaths, by the way, too.
Kolakovic recognized this and took steps to do something about it to save the church. Whereas, in his own words, the church as an institution sought to make a treaty, so to speak, with the state to save itself. It's like, we'll go along with what you want. We'll play along with your totalitarian regime so long as you promise to leave us alone and do no harm to us. And the state was happy to do that, knowing then that the church was not going to do anything to upset the status quo.
Right.
It didn't have to destroy the church. This was the problem that the Nazis had when they went into different countries and then shut the churches down. or said, well, you can operate, but here's your talking points. Here's what you're allowed to talk about. And guys like
I like that. I've never thought of this term, but that term of domesticating, I mean, because it requires that. I mean, you have to be brought into a particular kind of conformity for it to
heal.
work. Yeah, brought to heal, and any kind of uniqueness or particularity or even just dissenting opinion can't be tolerated.
Right.
Or at least it has to be silenced. You have to keep it silent. And the kind of cognitive dissonance that you'd have to live, I mean, the double life you have to live under such a system, eventually you're going to break.
Yeah.
Or you just live a double life, right? You have things like the black market, right, that runs parallel to the communist, handouts.
Yeah. Well, this is why they've now targeted homeschooling, because it's reached that tipping point where 17 million people now are homeschooling in the United States.
That almost doubled, right, in a year?
Yeah. And
more than doubled.
And you're threatening the narrative, because you're stepping out of line, you're stepping out of the mob, and you're forming your own thoughts and opinions separate from the state curriculum. And that's a threat.
Right. It's interesting because they tolerated this kind of like a parallel education economy with things like, Khan Academy, which has a lot of leftist kind of stuff going on in it, but whatever.
But it's all numbers. It's statistics. It's less than a third of the population was engaged in it.
Right.
Now it's reached that tipping point where you're kind of up around 3-4%.
Well, and I've perceived even in the last few months a pretty dramatic shift in the algorithm on YouTube. And I've wondered, is this shift happening where it's moving me away from things that are informative to things that are just
entertaining,
kind of silly or entertaining? Yeah. And it's not. I don't think it's the quantity of the content on the platform that's changed, but it's actually the algorithm that's shifted.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm constantly recommended reaction videos. Like,
there's a really good one from Weird Al yesterday.
Oh, really?
He watched the Drake video. It's really good. 4 minutes and 55 seconds.
There we go.
It's hilarious.
But yeah, no, I've noticed that too, is that in order to find anything of substance, I have to go find it specifically. Usually I have to DuckDuckGo it and then follow the link from DuckDuckGo back.
I was
to
just
YouTube.
looking for the Shadowgate documentary, and for some reason my browser set to YouTube, or set to Google here.
Yeah.
And it's like, everything is like, it's misinformation, da-da-da-da-da. So then I gotta go back to, why is it not coming up? It should be one of the first links. I'm so used to using DuckDuckGo.
Right. So I think,
but even DuckDuckGo will get co-opted at some point.
What we're seeing now, and this is the internal friction within the churches, is that Christians, whether they're awake to it or not, have been participating in the status quo for so long that now that they're being forced to make a choice about medical apartheid, for example, most are participating in medical apartheid because they can't give up the status quo. They can't give up that sense of, well, when I go to church on Sunday, I don't want to be bothered. I'm not making a political stance. I'm not a revolutionary. I'm just going to church. I just want to worship.
Well, not everything has to be a political or revolutionary stance until it is politicized. Now. Yeah, it gets politicized, and then it's like, you just wearing a face covering becomes you're saying what political affiliation you're in. You're like, how? I'm not. I'm not. I'm trying to say something else actually about its effectiveness and usefulness, and just.
But you can't talk that way. Nuance is gone. Critical thinking it's been dead for a long time.
Did you read the Boghossian resignation letter? Boghossian was it was in Oregon, so it must have been Portland State University.
Oh, right.
Philosopher.
Yeah.
He co-wrote those papers with I just lost his name. The critical race guy. The guy that's been doing all of this stuff on. I've linked to him. James Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
They wrote all the mock papers, and then so then he got disciplined because he was, whatever scientific integrity, he didn't tell the editors that they submitted these fake papers to that they were doing a human experiment on them, and that's against some code of ethics.
As opposed to what they were doing.
Anyway, you read his resignation letter, and where he goes through, like, over the last 10 or so years, and just the inside baseball of what's happened in the university in that time. And the way that he gets assaulted, he's encouraged to be assaulted by faculty and other faculty and by administrators, by the students. You're like, really? Yeah, no, it's true. So it's a toxic environment. And if anybody finds out, are they going to send their kids there? Well, some are, because they want their kids to behave that way.
Correct.
But I think a lot of parents are going to be like, I don't really want my kids to be in an environment where they're being basically militarized against me, against our way of life, against their fellow citizens, against other people. Ultimately,
Well, here, what I hear is a lot of apathy. Do your best. Just try and get what you can. Don't.
cooperate to graduate.
Yeah, basically. It's like the University of Minnesota requires all students to be vaccinated, regardless of whether you're on campus or not. So I've asked people I know, hey, are you going to get vaccinated? I'm like, I don't know what to do. I can't get a religious exemption or a moral exemption. They won't even, they like, oh, here's the paperwork, but we're not going to give it to you. And they're told that. You can fill it out, but unless you sue us, and then,
Which tells you that the university is part of the state.
Well, yeah,
It's a tool of the state.
Yeah,
And they're cooperative with the state. They're they're carrying the water for the state.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever
Exactly.
the state is. I mean, I know that's
Right.
kind of a fudgy definition, but yeah.
But this goes back to what I said earlier of if those same university students come to church on Sunday and hear their pastor say, no, do not comply. This is unjust. It's immoral. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. And it goes against conscience. They're not going to listen to their pastor, by and large. They may
No,
listen
because
to
you're
them
just
in the
supposed to
moment.
preach the gospel to them.
Exactly. But that's how they've cornered us. The state has cornered pastors essentially, and we've allowed them to do it, and that's how we've allowed it to happen.
Well, if you remember back with Obamacare, when they were talking about the religious exemption for the abortion mandate, which ended up not getting actually ratified by the whatever group that is. DHS? No. Yeah, it is DHS. No, that's Homeland Security. What is it? The Health and Human Safety.
HHS. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, the exemption or the language, at least from our president at the time, Mr. Obama, was that religious is a private matter. What you do in private is fine, right? Just like they apply to the sexual ethic.
Yeah.
But what you do in public, that's something that we actually have control over. You're like, do you really? Yeah.
He reads it as freedom of religious conscience.
Correct. That was the move.
Yeah.
That was the move. And so that's what they're applying here too, is to say you can have a private religious conscience, but there is no corporate religious conscience, for example.
Yeah.
That belongs to the congregation or to the denomination or to the confession. Yeah.
So as part of its quest to define reality, a totalitarian state seeks not just to control your actions, but also your thoughts and emotions, which we just covered. The ideal subject of a totalitarian state is someone who has learned to love Big Brother. Back in the Soviet era, totalitarianism demanded love for the party, and compliance with the party's demands was enforced by the state. Today's totalitarianism demands allegiance to a set of progressive beliefs, many of which are incompatible with logic, certainly with Christianity. Compliance is forced less by the state than by elites who form public opinion, and by private corporations that, thanks to technology, control our lives far more than we would like to admit.
You mean private corporations are part of the state now?
Yeah, it's called fascism.
How dare you accuse them of that nasty word?
Well, then we should change the definition in the dictionary.
Probably will.
Probably will. That's why I said it.
Oh man. No, it's true.
Yeah,
It's true. When you have corporate, why is it corporations 100 and over that have to follow this mandate? 100 employees or over, because those are the ones that have been carrying the water the whole time.
correct.
So there you go.
Yeah,
By way of their unions or by other means.
correct. And good luck with the union. I mean, other than the teachers' union, which has been proven now to be incredibly corrupt. And
I could have told you that 30
it's
years
a
ago.
Marxist hotbed. Well, so could I.
So is the library union, by the way.
Yeah, no
in LA.
kidding. Yeah. Although everyone's like, why did the U.S. Postal Service get a pass? And I'm like, look into it.
I've been trying to find the document. I had the document before the election, and now I can't find it.
Yeah.
And the guy who ran the whole thing, who authored the document, is now dead.
Yeah.
The head of the AFL-CIO,
Yet.
he died somehow. He was overweight, so
Sure.
maybe it was COVID or something.
Yeah, sure. Let's just say that complicity has its rewards.
It does.
But that Maricopa County stuff, like the audits and the canvassing, and now Pennsylvania came out and they're like, dude, there's just no way. Like, they're like, we did the canvass. There's no way.
Yeah.
Like, the jig is up. It's just a matter of whether the courts will even hear the cases.
Well, again, I don't think it matters. The public opinion is all that matters in the
I was
end.
going to say, because they've got the receipts now. Like they've got the gun, they've got the bullets, they've got the fingerprints and the DNA evidence.
It's just convincing people that it actually is something worth fighting about.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Because like I said, all the polls right now for people that voted that direction are like, yeah, this is not good.
Well, there is something, I mean, we know this as pastors. There's something about bringing up, your negligence to people. That's almost more offensive than just showing them straight up guilt.
Yeah.
You know?
It really is.
But if you point out where they're just being lazy or where they're
Yeah.
just kind of trying to ignore something,
Yeah.
rather than do something,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it ends up being almost more offensive.
It does. Well, it's shameful.
Yeah, because it's shame. That's true. Yeah.
It's shame-based, and people don't like to be shamed.
Yeah. They'll hold on to guilt, but they won't.
Which is why, like Jeremiah said, they've lost their ability to blush.
That's right.
They can't blush. They have no shame anymore. And as a consequence, they're going to be punished. Which, by the way, we talked about this before we hit record. Let's talk about this real quick before we continue. But people have asked me, why aren't these people being punished? Like, why aren't pastors who are unfaithful being punished? Why aren't these politicians and these cultural
By God.
influencers? And why aren't they being punished by God? And my response is, they are. Are you not paying attention?
Mm-hmm.
He has given them the desires of their heart. That is his wrath. So we know how this ends. There's historical precedent.
Well, what we don't like about that, I suppose, and the reason why we don't think that's actually a just punishment is that there's collateral damage.
Well, absolutely.
They hurt and harm others, and then you're like,
Yeah.
well, and that doesn't seem fair, I guess. Yeah.
Fair.
Such a silly word.
Well, if you had armor and you knew how to fight, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So many conservatives today fail to grasp the gravity of this threat, dismissing it as mere political correctness. A previous generation's disparaging term for so-called wokeness. It's easy to dismiss people, like the former Soviet professor, as hysterical, if you think of what's happening today as nothing more than the return of the left-wing campus kookiness of the 1990s. Back then, the standard conservative response was dismissive. Wait till those kids get out into the real world and have to find a job. Well,
They don't have to today.
That's true. They
just
don't.
collect a check.
Ha! Check and me. Well, they did find a job, and they brought the campus to corporate America, to the legal and medical professions, to media, to elementary and secondary schools, and to other institutions of American life. In this cultural revolution, which intensified in the spring and summer of 2020, they are attempting to turn the entire country into a woke college campus.
And the military. He left that
And
out.
the military now. Yeah.
He didn't see that coming. That was quick, too.
Yeah. Well, obviously it was a long time in coming.
Well, externally, I mean.
Yeah, externally, though, it seemed like it happened real quick. Which is, to me, the most deeply concerning of all, actually. Because, well...
Because that's your literal defense for,
Yeah,
your
exactly.
identity. Yeah.
And I'm not actually worried about foreign military challenging us. I'm worried about the U.S. military being turned on its own citizens.
Well, I think it'll be the most inept of them. That will be. Yeah. But the others, what will happen to them? Are they going to leave? Are they going to go out? Are they going to form,
Yeah, of course.
civil militia? They're going to try to
Yes.
just defend communities? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and they already are, actually.
It's further, exactly. Do you know how many veterans teach weekend survival courses and
Correct.
combatives
Yeah,
courses?
that's what I was
and
thinking about. Yeah.
retreats and conferences. I mean, there's so many now at this point. So they did. And they turned the entire culture into one giant woke college campus. So today in our societies, dissenters from the woke party line find their businesses, careers, and reputations destroyed. They are pushed out of the public square, stigmatized, canceled, and demonized as racists, sexists, homophobes, and the like. And they are afraid to resist because they are confident that no one will join them or defend them.
Fascists, terrorists, domestic terrorists. We've had that now. These are all
Yeah.
post the publishing of this book.
To go back to my point earlier, homeschoolers are now lumped in with those people.
Yeah. Well, and I like how they create this QAnon thing, right? And then they use it as this like, well, it's a catch-all for basically evangelical Christians
Yeah.
and conservative Roman Catholics.
Yep.
And basically anybody who's a traditionalist of some sort.
Have you heard about Blue Anon?
Right. Well, that's a joke
Yeah.
that was made
Well,
up
is it
in response.
Is it a joke though?
Well, it's pretty descriptive.
It's a satire, but it hits a little bit on the nose.
Right. Well, because there's always an equal and opposite reaction, right? I mean, that's the law of thermodynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
No, the second law of thermodynamics is that all things seek the
that's
same
right, equilibrium.
homeostasis.
So what is equal and opposite reaction? Is that not thermodynamics? That's something else?
That's physics.
Whatever it is. Some kind of physics. Anyway, it's true. You create QAnon, well, then you're going to create the opposite reaction, right? Then there's the conspiracy theorists on the other end of the spectrum, so-called conspiracy theorists.
Right.
How much of conspiracies? I mean, conspiracies happen.
Newton's third law.
Having theories about, what'd you say?
Newton's third law of motion.
Newton's third law of motion. Okay. Well, old guy.
Physics, baby.
Anyway, there's always conspiracies because that's what the heart does. It conspires against God and against one another. Okay. That's such a silly thing to say that doesn't happen. And theories, just to try and here's a theory of the case as to what conspiracy I think might be happening here. Where people are conspiring together against me or against others, right? I mean,
Right.
I don't know why that's a bad thing. Anyway, but yes, you're going to have equal and opposite ones, right? So all the Christians are getting together and they're going to overthrow the school boards, and they're going to turn this country into like I don't know, some kind of theocracy or something. Which I'm sure there's some that want to, but
Yeah, that's true.
God and country, that kind of thing. But it is interesting, right? Because that everybody is because it's just that polarization, right? Again,
Correct.
And you get the equal opposite reaction.
Well, it's a way to stigmatize, marginalize, and disenfranchise those who you disagree with so that you can dehumanize them,
Right.
turn them into a monster, and then justify whatever it is that you do to them.
Right, but what they don't know is that by demonizing and marginalizing others, eventually you'll be on the receiving end of that.
Well, you're dehumanizing yourself, first of all.
Yeah, in the end, right? Yeah.
And in the end, like you said, in the end, you are setting yourself up because you're a useful idiot. And so once they're done with you and you've outlived your usefulness, they'll turn on you too. Because you're a peasant too. Somebody pointed this out, a friend of mine, that all of these mandates are directed entirely toward the peasant class.
We used
None
to
of
call it the
these
middle
things-
class, but yeah, okay.
They're a peasant class. Middle class was invented to buffer the wealthy, gentrified, landowning colonialists from the Indians, basically.
Invented with market and currency manipulation.
Yeah,
by the way.
exactly.
Yeah.
Again, you don't learn this stuff because you're not supposed to learn. Again, you can't learn the tactics that are being used against you. And then when you learn them, you're like, ugh.
Unless you watch, what is it, Animal House, right? Fat,
There
Dumb,
you
and
go.
Happy is no way to go through life, kid.
That's right. Son, fat, dumb, and happy is no way to go through life.
Except that's exactly how we're taught to go through life.
Yep, Netflix and chill, baby. Go eat your McDonald's. So then we have the gentleness of soft totalitarianism, which is like calling jujitsu the gentle art. It's folding
Little
clothes
irony.
with a body still in it. It's possible to miss the onslaught of totalitarianism if you don't watch TV ever or go on social media. It's possible to miss the onslaught of totalitarianism precisely because we have a misunderstanding of how its power works. In 1951, poet and literary critic Czesław Miłosz, exiled to the West from his native Poland as an anti-communist dissident, wrote that Western people misunderstand the nature of communism because they think of it only in terms of might and coercion. Well, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
I've read Czesław Miłosz. That's interesting. I've read his poetry. It's just weird. I haven't seen his name in a while. So that's wrong, he wrote. There is an internal longing for harmony and happiness that lies deeper than ordinary fear or the desire to escape misery or physical destruction. There is an internal longing for harmony and happiness that lies deeper than ordinary fear or the desire to escape misery or physical destruction.
It's more important to be honest, to be unified and happy,
Yes.
even if that means some degree of misery and physical destruction.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll inject you with this.
You might
don't know
suffer a
what's in
little
it,
bit.
but you might suffer a little bit. But you get to live your life.
The facial paralysis only lasts for a few days.
Right, exactly. Just take
But
your
it's
2
worth
pills
it.
a day, get your shot every 6 months.
It's worth it for harmony and happiness.
Don't cover up your chip. We need to be able to scan you.
Or
That's
it's like the meme. It's not a meme. It's actually just a screenshot, and it's Zuckerberg doing a little like demonstration, and then his laptop's on his desk behind him,
yeah.
and he's got tape over
Yeah, he's got the tape over it. Yep.
over the camera and the microphone. You're like, huh?
Yeah. What does he know that we don't? Or he doesn't let his kids have social media accounts either.
That's right. It's like, well, I'm going to use technology against you, but you don't dare use it against me.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. When they come with the chips, I just want everybody to remember that we told you. We warned you. Again, we warned you last year. No one listened. We're warning you again this year.
Well, arguably, they won't need chips, actually. But that's another story for another day.
Yeah, it's not a chip. It's a digital code. It's just a
Just
barcode.
read your brain patterns. It's
Yep.
fine.
Again, they can tell your sexual preferences by the way that you walk. So,
By the way, your phone swishes in your pocket.
yeah, there you go. So there is an internal longing. I want to get along with people, and I want to be happy. And if that means that I got to be, a little bit of misery, a little bit of suffering, a little bit of destruction of my physical well-being, yeah, so be it. At least I'm happy.
Possessions. Yeah.
So that is wrong, Milos wrote. There is an internal longing for harmony and happiness that lies deeper than ordinary fear or desire to escape misery or physical destruction.
And so they're going to use that
Correct.
deeper fear for harmony and happiness.
Yes.
Okay.
Which they have nurtured from kindergarten all the way through the, graduate level of education.
We're going to get you a good job, and you're going to you're going to build some assets, and you're going to have a cute
Also,
little
you'll
family.
notice this is really important, actually. And I've emphasized this a lot lately, but that compulsory education and the media close your future. There's no openness to the future. If you listen to news, for example, the future is closed. Like there's nothing.
They tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah, they're telling you what's going to happen, and it's never optimistic. And compulsory education closes your future in the same way. You're going to get these grades. You're going to graduate with this degree. You're going to get married. You're going to get a house. You're going to have kids. You're going to have this career. This is where you're going to do it at. This is how you're going to do it. And then when you retire, you live out the last 10 to 15 years of your life doing whatever, probably getting a second job at Walmart as a greeter, and then you're going to die. So compulsory education closes your future for you by telling you this is your life. This is your whole life. And you actually, this is what's so weird. You actually buy into this. It's like I had one of my teammates, he's like 24. And he came up to me a couple months ago. He's like, hey, how come you're 50 years old and you're getting a tattoo, an arm sleeve? And I go, yeah. And he goes, don't you think that's weird? I'm like, why? He's like, because you're 50. I'm like, so? And he looks at me and goes, yeah, that's a good point. Never thought of it that way before. I'm like, what?
It's like the people who decide to pursue a second or third career when they're 60.
Yeah.
You're like,
yeah, exactly.
but you're too old. You're not going to be. Nobody's going to give you a job at this age. You're like,
yeah,
how do you
why not?
know that? Why do you say
Right.
that? Why are you?
Right.
I mean, it's projection, I suppose.
Right.
No.
Well, no, it's 100%, but it's indoctrination projected onto you. You're stepping out of line. Get back in line. It's like I was talking with some older folks the other day about this. Act your age is one of the most meaningless statements, but everybody accepts it as if it's God's honest truth. Act your age.
I'm trying to think of these famous composers that didn't compose until they were 50 or 60.
Sure.
They were musicians maybe before that.
Right.
But you've seen that with authors, their first book.
Well, you
When
got to
they're-
live. You got to live. You need life. You need experience. You need
Oh, to
seasoning.
write?
You need
Sure. Yeah,
you
of
need
course.
maturation.
Yeah.
Sure. Some people write the great novel when they're in their early 20s, but those are the outliers. Like Gladwell
Hemingway
talks
or
about.
something. Yeah.
But they're outliers. And Hemingway lived a lot before he ever
yeah.
wrote.
Well,
but-
with the wars and yeah.
yeah, but the point is then, if you think about act your age, what does that even mean? Act your age. Does that mean at 60 I can't become a missionary and sell everything I have and move to Costa Rica? Or I can go back to school when I'm 50? Or just for the fun of learning? Or I decide that in the middle of what I'm doing, you know what, I don't have a passion for this anymore. I quit. I'm going to go do what I love. I'm going to go become a forest ranger or something, whatever. It's like, well, he's not acting. He never acts his age. What? Like, who determined how we're behaving depending on a random biological number?
Right. Yeah, I know you're going to talk about education in the church, but
Yeah.
on Sunday. But I mean, if there isn't one thing that's bugged me more than anything is the way that we've applied that same kind of
Yes.
philosophy to, basically progressive education to the church. And there's a sense that people do grow in wisdom and stature and nurture, right? I mean, Jesus did.
Well,
we do too, right? But the call, we do these silly mind games where it's like, well, adults have Bible study and children have Sunday school, and you're like, actually, it's all Sunday school, really,
Right.
or it's all
Right.
Bible study. I mean,
They used to call adult Bible study Sunday school.
really,
Yeah, when I was in missionary, that's what they called it. It confused me because they're like, you have to go to Sunday school. I'm like, I'm not 5. And then you
right.
go and you're like, oh, wait, these are all people in their early 20s.
right, yeah,
It's
and that's
Sunday
my
school.
point. It's like, well, I don't care how old you are. It's like study God's word, right?
Yeah.
Be a student, be a disciple.
Right.
What
But what we've done by closing the future and destroying the past, by eliminating both the past and the future, is we trap people in an eternal present, which doesn't allow them to mature. It doesn't allow them to change. You're
Well,
caught
but
in this
but like-
perpetual state of adolescence.
to this point, then it allows them, whoever's the totalitarian, to control
Correct.
your development because they've established what your future is.
Exactly.
So they basically put you on a path. And they said, I remember when I was on a band tour in the UK, we were in Europe, England, and I was talking to similar age people, high school age kids, and they were like, "Well, have you taken? I don't know what the name of the test is. Have you taken the test?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like, well, you take the test, and then that tells you like whether you get to go to this school or that school, or whether you do this
Yeah.
trade or that trade.
Yep, I remember
Like,
that test.
wait a minute, your government. I mean, this is now 30 years ago. Your government tells you, and this same thing in Australia, and I think probably throughout all the kingdom. They tell you basically what you can study based off your aptitude in certain disciplines when you're 15. Like, how do they even know?
Yep. I wrote that I want to be an archaeologist or a paleontologist. And then I took that test, and then we all had to go meet our high school guidance counselor. And he looked at my test and he said, well, that's impossible for you to ever become an archaeologist or a paleontologist. He said that to me. I remember that. To this day, I remember him going, that's impossible.
Gattaca too, right?
And what he told me is that according to my test, I was qualified to work with my hands as like a custodian or in a machine shop, something like that. And I was like, I'm 15. My attitude towards testing when I'm 15 was, this is dumb and a waste of my time.
Yeah, maybe the best test taker isn't necessarily the best.
Well, judging by the valedictorian, salutatorian of my high school graduation class, testing means nothing as far as future success goes.
What happened to them?
They have good lives, not, they're peasants. Let's put it that way.
Sorry, my mouse died. I got to plug in a real one.
Oh, no.
I know. All right, there we go.
So what happens then, the communist ideology fills that void that opened in the lives of early 20th century intellectuals, most of whom had ceased to believe in religion. There we go. Communism is a religion. Today's left-wing totalitarianism once again appeals to an internal hunger, specifically the hunger for a just society, one that vindicates and liberates the historical victims of oppression. It masquerades as kindness, demonizing dissenters and disfavored demographic groups to protect the feelings of quote-unquote victims in order to bring about quote-unquote social justice.
He's doing the quotes just so he's imposing, our contemporary language so that we see how it's contemporary. Yeah.
Right. And to that point, and to my earlier point that I just made, the proclamation of the church is what opens up the future. We know the future is open because we have hope that we will be raised from the dead to life everlasting.
Except
Therefore,
our experience in the local congregation is often closed, right? I mean, they understand. I pointed this out yesterday. The congregation I served in Indiana, from day one I got there, it was like, we're going to close in 3 years. I'm like, who says that?
Right.
Bible doesn't say that. Well, we've been saying that. How long have you been saying that? Since the 70s?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. It's a long 3 years.
Yeah, you closed your future a long time ago.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you see this, well, in the upper Midwest in particular, you see that feast or famine mentality everywhere.
It's kind of just a despair mentality.
Yeah. It's silent resignation.
Oh, resignation. I like that
It's
word.
just this kind of quiet resignation of, this is our fate, we're doomed. And there's nothing
I
more
always said
offensive
it's
to
like-
that mindset than you or I coming along and saying, the future is open.
Yeah.
What
And
are
that's
you
what I
worried
pointed
about?
out to them. Like, what are you saying to God? You're saying
Yeah.
he can't love you? He's not going to
Yeah.
take care of you? He's
Yeah.
not going to give you opportunity? He's shut the door?
Yeah.
He's checked out? Well, then you might as well close and just give up because you already have, effectively.
Yeah, it's like a passive
Virtually.
aggressive dare. It's like, I dare you to close this church. Go ahead. I dare you.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's actually a little bit more aggressive than...
But again, in the end of the day, like we discussed earlier, God's wrath is that he gives you what you want.
Mm-hmm.
So stop talking that way, because if you really want it, he'll give it to you.
You can just suffer there in despair.
If you don't want it, then stop saying it. Pray.
Well, he doesn't want it for you, so why do you want it for yourself?
Right. Yeah, ultimately you're putting your words in God's mouth.
Gives
And there's
them
no
over
gospel.
to the thoughts and intents of their heart. Yep.
It's actually a sin against the Holy Spirit at that point, because you're rejecting the gospel and the sacraments.
Yeah, I was having a hard time not giving that too much,
Yeah.
saying that too much.
The contemporary cult of social justice identifies members of certain social groups as victimizers, as scapegoats, and calls for their suppression as a matter of righteousness. In this way, the so-called social justice warriors, aka SJWs, who started out as liberals, animated by an urgent compassion, end by abandoning authentic liberalism and embracing an aggressive and punitive politics that resembles Bolshevism, as the Soviet style of communism was first called. At the turn of the 21st century, the cultural critic René Girard prophetically warned, quote, "The current process of spiritual demagoguery and rhetorical overkill has transformed the concern for victims into a totalitarian command and a permanent inquisition." Welcome to 2021 America.
Good night.
Yeah, nailed it. This is what the survivors of communism are saying to us. Liberalism's admirable care for the weak and marginalized is fast turning into a monstrous ideology that, if it is not stopped, will transform liberal democracy into a softer therapeutic form of totalitarianism. Take your therapeutics.
That's kind of a
Fill
mic
your
drop
prescription.
moment, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, and we both, I know it's a little fatiguing, but try, at least I do, at least try to listen to some of the more liberal-minded folks that are more liberal-minded than I am,
Yeah.
in the best sense of the word. I would say more left liberal, right? But they're equally frustrated, as we are, with the fact that people who once considered themselves liberal have stopped thinking
Okay.
for themselves, right? I mean, they've basically subjected themselves to this therapeutic mindset of, everything has to be about victimhood and victimization, so that when you tear down the Robert E. Lee statue, what do you put in its place? A time capsule that has, what did it have in it? Like Black Lives Matter paraphernalia, like as if that's more significant than
Yeah.
the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Well,
kind-
to them
well,
it is, because it's about them.
I suppose. I can't remember what all was in there. I mean, it's just
Well,
completely absurd. I think it was
idealists make the best dictators. I've said it before.
maybe a rainbow flag was in there. That sounds
Whatever.
like something you'd put in there.
But it doesn't matter at the end of the day, because it's self-serving. It's demonic, because a spirit has taken them over. And the church has, as far as I can tell, completely abdicated its responsibility to call this stuff out.
I pointed that out on somebody's wall because they didn't see it, that every branch of our government has been co-opted by a demonic ideology.
Yeah.
Right? And so it not only is it supplanting faith in Christ, of course, but it's also working contrary to the good that God gives through creation, right? Against even against the very humanity itself. And if you fail to see that, I mean, you do nothing to protect and to warn. And maybe there's still opportunity. I mean, we don't know. You're a little bit more resigned than I am, I think, on this, but I think it's still possible. Maybe not internationally, but at least nationally. And maybe not nationally, maybe only pockets of this country, remain steadfast, And
Well,
other
I think
parts
we can
just
see
leave.
from the map this morning following the press conference that the flyover states, as they're called, have already made their choice. We're not listening to you.
You know what's interesting about that? Those 14 or 15 states, whatever it is, with the exception of, I think, Indiana, but maybe not. And by the way, it's not the Indiana governor, it's the AG. So we'll see what the governor ends up saying. that actually corresponds to the geographic boundaries that have, when they redid the boundaries for the FEMA, there's 5 FEMA regions.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
It actually corresponds to one of the FEMA regions. I think Region 5, if I remember right. It's number 4. And so it's like, oh, that's interesting. They've already pigeonholed you nationally. They already recognized that you were going to be the ones.
Yeah.
And that they weren't going to allow for travel between Region 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 because you're going to be the ones who are the outliers who don't do the thing that needs to be done in order to keep your borders open or whatever.
Right.
It's
crazy.
I don't know. Maybe I should be more resigned. I don't know.
Well, we've been through this before as a country, and the
true.
church has gone through this before. And we're still, in a sense, suffering the hangover from the Civil War.
You think so?
I think this is basically what's happened, that everything that happened then has come home to roost, because the fallout from the Civil War, well, not only in this country, but you see what happened in Europe, for example, the rise of the Bismarck, and how the end of World War I was 1945 for many people. Because, again, the German military never surrendered at Versailles.
Yeah.
So the war wasn't over in 1918. The
Change of names, change of command,
right.
But yeah.
But it was the same war. So that was over in 1945, but like Kolakovic and others are recognizing too, the October Revolution, which is a part of that World War I era movement, didn't end in the Moscow trials of 36 and 37, for example. It didn't end with the fall of Nazism in 45. It didn't end at all. It just kept moving forward. It kept spreading, and it kept evolving, and it kept changing the approach vector, but it was the same monster.
Yeah. By way of dialectic, I think.
And so a lot of what we're talking about today is still a hangover from the Civil War in this country. This is why we're still debating about Jim Crow.
Or it came up again. It was brought up again. That's
what
a
I'm
Jim
saying,
Crow law.
Yeah, it came up again because we never really dealt with it the first time.
Well, can you really deal with something like racism? I mean, you can address it. You can obviously you can address your own heart in regards to that, and maybe corporately in certain settings. But I think what I see with that is it's just another useful tool by the totalitarian. Is like to divide and conquer. It's like, you didn't know you were racially divided, but hey, guess what? You actually are.
We're going to make sure you know now, and then we're going to leverage that.
Well, we're going to make you racially divided. We're going to set this up because we're going to militarize a certain, race against others and destroy property or whatever. And it's like, why?
Well, what you see then is that locally, for example, we live in the upper Midwest. So we live in a hyper-segregated society in the upper Midwest. It's just a fact. Because it's predominantly Scandinavians and Germanic peoples that settle in this area.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be hyper-segregated on Sunday mornings, for example, just by virtue of where people live and where they settled at.
Right.
And that's not to say then, like where I live, we've seen a significant influx of Mexican workers and Latino workers, right? And then they settled here, and then their kids go to school and they integrate, and all of a sudden now they're just there. And
you're going to see Afghani too.
I don't think they're coming here. I think we're full up. I think they're going to places like Ohio and
Wisconsin.
And Wisconsin. There we go.
We have 30,000 or
See,
more.
we got the Somali immigration.
Did.
Obama dumped all of them here in Minnesota, which is what I was going to say, is that the Mexican population, which used to be vilified, they've integrated. And then the Somalis came in, and the Somalis
They actually want the benefits and blessings of being a part of this country. Yeah.
But then the Somalis came in and they don't. They don't want to integrate. They don't want to adapt. And the state has effectively said to, for example, the teachers, there's nothing you can do about that. You just have to accept the fact that they're different, and you're not supposed to force your views on them. To which the teachers say they're unteachable. They're unteachable. And we can't control them because they're undisciplined. They don't listen to me.
So then what, right?
Well, exactly. And that's what has happened now in especially in smaller areas where the Somalis have settled. There's an immense amount of friction now between the population that was there and the immigrant population. And you see this repeatedly with every immigrant population. There's a certain time frame in which there's conflict.
I was listening to a Swedish commentary saying that about 30% of Sweden, like native Sweden people, won't go because of the Muslim immigration that happened there.
Right. Well, 70% of rapes in places like Germany are from the immigrant population out. Because like in Sweden, you have rape gangs, and the government allows it, but the local population's like, this is a significant, and this is an imminent threat. And the government's like, you're racist. And they're like, okay, fine, I'm racist. But
same thing in France, I suppose, as well.
Yeah. Is that every generation you grapple with these questions, but now we're grappling with them in a way that the governing institutions of these states and these countries are saying, hey, you just have to understand this. They're different than we are culturally. They have different values than we do.
Yeah, they marry 12-year-old girls.
But that's the problem, is that we're not just dealing with a cultural distinction. We're dealing with a religious distinction. And when you are, like he points out in the essay, if you as a culture have essentially jettisoned religion, like it's gone, we're not religious people, we don't believe in God. Well, that doesn't matter to the people that live across the street from you. They do. And they see you as an infidel. They see you
and it's also naive because the state knows if you jettison one religion, just another one's going to take its place.
Yeah, that's it.
And they just want to be the one.
Correct.
This faux nationalism or whatever it is.
Whatever you want to call it. But it creates these divisions in the local culture, which then doesn't allow you to get along with your neighbor, which then sets you at odds with your neighbor, and it's prejudicial, it's divisive. And then the state uses that, like you said, and it leverages that. And so even the outreach of the church then is profoundly affected by that. Because the church can't go into those areas either, because the church is seen as, well, even if the church dares to go into those areas, the church is immediately seen as infidels. They're a threat. So they're not welcomed at all. And
it's like East Dearborn, Michigan, where they have Sharia courts.
Right.
You're like, wait a minute.
Right.
Can you do that? Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah, we do.
We just gave over East Dearborn to that population.
And therein, to me, lies the problem, is that there's no sense of national, like, this is America, this is Canada, this is
or
Mexico.
State, or even just local community.
Yeah, right, exactly. And as a consequence, when you get it break down to that level, and then you look at the local churches, the people in the churches who, again, have basically maintained the status quo for generations, who, like we talked about, they just want to live with these people, and they just want to get along with everybody, and they just want to be happy. And what you're suggesting that we do by standing against that, or pointing it out, or even preaching against Islam, or saying, hey, we got to figure out how to get along with our neighbors. So maybe we should have an outreach to our neighbors who believe differently than we do, and create a social outreach. The response of the church historically has been, I don't think we should do that.
But the response of the church and the state in both places is to say there are certain non-negotiables. Right. I mean, depending on what your confession is, and our state has its own confession. It's the Constitution. It's the first, the amendments. It's the which is part of the Constitution. It's the Bill of Rights. Right. It's the Declaration of Independence. These are our documents, and they set the dogma for the state. If you want to treat it as a religion, that's the dogma. Right. Right. And if you want to be a citizen, that is, if you want to use the analogy, a congregation member of the state. It requires you to subscribe to that dogma. And if your private religious or even corporate religious perspective, say as a Muslim or whatnot, is not compatible with the religion of the state, there's going to be pretty significant conflict. In Western democracy and that religious ideology, they're not compatible.
Right. Which should raise red flags for everybody, because
everybody, including the totalitarian.
Right. Well, that's what I mean. So even authoritarian religion being welcomed by an authoritarian state, which should raise red flags for people to be like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This isn't compatible. So why are they welcoming this? And why are they vilifying us for pointing it out?
Yeah, that's why I'm like, the Taliban cooperating with the CCP, this is not going to go well on the long run.
You can't really? What?
Because they both make exclusive truth.
Yeah.
Right. So how is this going to work together?
Well, again, it goes back to Animal Farm, when Snowball takes the dogs and raises them as his own. They're only loyal to him. Excuse me. What are the Taliban going to do? Whatever the CCP tells them to do.
Oh, so if they put themselves in the subservient position, I always wonder if it isn't still going to ultimately be some kind of payback for the Uyghurs. I know they're not
100%.
friends with the Uyghurs, but they have that in common, at least, the
Yeah.
confession, even if they're not the same tradition within Islam.
Yeah.
You know, the Uyghurs did live in Afghanistan, and the Chinese took them hostage. So, there may be something there.
No,
It's
I
gonna
think
be-
whatever deal they worked out gives Taliban what they want, and gives
Roads.
China what they want.
Some
they're-
infrastructure, yeah.
It's two evil entities benefiting from the other person's malevolence.
Well, they both want money, so that'll work
Well,
out.
they want money, they want power.
Mhm.
China has access now to our military technology, so
So does Russia. and
without
others.
having to steal it, we can just
It's beautiful.
pop the hood.
Beautiful move.
It's a
Just
beautiful thing. And the U.S. government participated in it. They planned it, as the
Some did.
receipts prove. And again, the church has just kind of sat dumb and said, "Yeah, well, Jesus will save us. I mean, we'll abdicate our vocation because Jesus will save us."
Well, it was 20 years ago that the Pentagon reported to Congress that they had lost $2 trillion worth of
Yes.
stuff
Yeah.
and unaccounted for money,
And
unaccounted
then,
for.
and then a plane hit that department of the Pentagon.
Isn't that funny?
It's so
Yeah.
weird.
There's all these millions of dollars missing, and then a few days later,
And I know that
Right.
could be a coincidence, but the fact that the office was never reopened after that, that's kind of
Right.
weird. That's kind of odd.
and the overseeing office, yeah. And this time it was like, well, we don't even need to fake it. We'll just give it to the Taliban,
Yeah, exactly.
and they'll
Yeah,
launder
this-
it for us. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, that's what we've gotten to is they don't have to hide anything anymore.
Yeah,
They
and
just do it.
part of me likes it in the sense that you know what you're dealing with. Then
Yeah.
the game is more obvious, and then
What's
so you
frustrating for
can't
me
call it
isn't
out.
that part of it. The frustration for me is the fact that the church does nothing.
What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to respond? Right?
Preach against it. Pray against it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think pray against it, definitely. I mean, preaching against it, it's hard because, like we've experienced, well, what Bible verses do you have, right? It's like,
I mean, really?
right.
Are you
I know.
dense?
Yeah, exactly. But
I'm
you know how
sorry.
it goes. You know how it goes. It's like to say, well, and especially with the conditioning of generations of saying the
Correct.
church has no business rebuking the state.
Right.
You're like, well, why not? Because we have God's word rebuking the state. So,
Yeah.
but Romans
constantly.
13. Sorry. Okay.
What? Render to God what is God's?
Yeah, that part. Missed that part.
Yeah. Weird how we put a period where there's a comma.
It's always render to Caesar. Don't worry about rendering to God anything.
Maybe since we're at the end of that section, let's kind of branch off for a second and do a debrief because I'm about to say stuff that has nothing to do with the topic.
Yeah. And we can hold off
but
on the rest of the work. Yeah, that's fine.
I've got no patience left. And I think I've talked about this before. I have no patience or charity left for people that want to sit quietly and participate in this, especially Christians, especially Christian leaders. Because I've heard this drumbeat constantly now, especially the last 4 or 5, 6 months.
What? Just do the thing?
Just do your job and don't worry, God's going to take care of everything. I'm like, do you not understand the two kingdoms? Do you not understand vocation? Do you not understand what you've been charged with as a parent, for example, in your vocation to protect and defend your children?
Well, the answer is no. I don't understand.
I know the answer is no, but I can't say what I really want to say to them, so I ask them questions instead. But I think my frustration is born out of thousands of years of the church conducting itself in one way. And then very recently, since the Enlightenment, the church deciding we're going to completely turn about face and become quietistic and passive, and we're going to spiritualize cowardice. We're not going to preach to our people about how this affects them in real time, how the laws manifest in their lives in real time, and how sin is using that to increase sin beyond measure. We're not going to talk about how baptism applies to their vocation and how God lays crosses on them in their vocation, or how they're sanctified in their vocations. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to spiritualize and disembody the Christian faith to the point that it has no connection whatsoever with the day-to-day lives of people.
Well, we've talked about this. I mean, I
yeah.
said, well, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it even mean, or more specifically, what does it mean to be a Lutheran? And you ask most people that, they have no idea.
Right.
There's no actual practical day-to-day reality
Right.
that relates to that. They might say, well, I believe what the Bible teaches or what the Catechism confesses, but
Well, it goes back to what Milos said too, which is, I know that I'm going to experience pain in my life. I know I'm going to make some bad choices and bad things are going to happen to me. That's inevitable. But I just want to be happy, and I just want to know that I'm with like-minded people. Again, it's nice. I want nice. I don't want good. Like I actually, at this point, I'm convinced the church does not even know what good is anymore.
Right, but I also don't think it knows what evil is. Like
That's
we
what
mentioned,
exactly.
mentioned before with with the Ephesians, fighting against principalities and powers
Yeah.
in the heavenly places, and like you do realize the Bible confesses repeatedly that there's great spiritual affliction that's happening, and have somebody like a king, Saul, who's held captive by an evil spirit that God puts upon him.
Yeah.
Right, he multiplies Saul's sin.
Right.
Right, that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with. There's a state leader who's pretty terrible, actually,
Right.
to his people, even to his friends and his own son. So let's be, I guess real is the point.
You're talking about Saul, right?
Yeah, Saul the king.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were talking about the president.
Oh, I didn't even think about his son. Oh,
Yeah.
what a connection. Look at that. His bagman,
Yeah. Nothing
Jonathan
ever
the
changes.
bagman. Huh.
Yeah, I'll tell you I'll tell you what's best for your kids. Just ignore my relationship with my son.
Both sons,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, both sons.
Daughter-in-law and
Yeah.
grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pay no attention.
But it's a good point because I keep bringing it up, especially of late, that nice and good are not synonyms, but we treat them as such. Because nice is what I smile and I show you my belly to let you know I'm not a threat. Good is the fact that, yeah, I might be a threat to you. And that in the long line of biblical saints, up until very recently, we are called to be good because God is good. And to be godly is to be good. And that goodness is actually what sets us free in Christ to serve our neighbor as we need to be served, love our neighbor as we need to be loved. And yet, because we have taken such a passive, quietistic stance, especially since the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, more and more Christian piety, the watchword of Christian piety is be nice. Be nice to everybody. Don't appear judgmental. Don't appear hypocritical. Don't be harsh. Be nice. Versus be good. And then you have to ask, well, what does it mean to be good? Well, Joshua was good. Caleb was good. Gideon was good. Abraham was good. David was good. Samson was considered good. Think about that, that Samson was considered good. And then to your point, who is considered evil? Well, Saul at a certain point. Who else is considered evil? Well, actually Solomon at a certain point did what was wrong in the eyes of God. He made treaties with foreign governments that were enemies. He sealed those treaties by marrying the princesses of these rulers, these kings, that he was warned against doing these things. And we see over and over, you can go back to Pharaoh, you can go back to Manasseh. These men were not good men because in the end, what they did is they turned their backs to God's word and they rejected God's promise. And all of a sudden they started hyphenating the name of God with other gods, or they started serving and making treaties with these people who claimed to be gods themselves or claimed to be channels of their gods. And now you're making these treaties, you're signing these deals, you're marrying the princesses of these foreign rulers who they worship other gods. And you're not bringing them into Israel and saying, you must renounce your gods, you must renounce your traditions and your culture. Instead, they're being brought in and they're allowed to worship their gods. They're allowed to set up altars. They're allowed to even build temples. And other people are seduced by this, especially because we love to appeal to authority. And as a consequence, we look to authority, we look to those cultural influencers to tell us how to act, how to think, how to talk, how to worship. And by doing so, by allowing this cult of authority, this cult of celebrity, this cult of influence, which no matter how you cut it, no matter what term you throw at it, it's a death cult because all gods are gods of death because they're not alive. They all demand human sacrifice. They all require us to give to them so that they might live. We have to pump life into them because they're dead things. So then, as we learn in Jeremiah, you worship dead things, you become dead things. You worship nothing, you become nothing. And, excuse me, as a consequence, what I see happening is that the church, it talks about what is good and it talks about what is right, but then it spiritualizes what is good and right and does it in such a way that in your daily vocation that God has laid upon you, in the cross that you bear for the sake of your neighbor, in your home, in your neighborhood, in your society, the good often is superseded by be nice. Be nice to people. Don't be threatening. Don't be intimidating. Again, don't be a threat. Be nice. Because the way to get people into church on Sunday is by being nice. Be a nice pastor. Be a people pleaser. Don't hurt people's feelings, and so on and so forth. Because that's really the pastor's job, is to maintain the status quo. Because, well, he needs a check. He's got to pay bills. He's got mouths to feed. And make your congregation happy. Make sure that your congregation is content. So be nice. And to the congregation, when you go to your vocations, go to your jobs, go to school, go home, go different places, be nice. Be nice, because being nice is how you're going to get people interested in the faith, which, in my opinion, is a lie. Being good is how you bring people into conversation about the faith and engage them in apologetics. But if you can't talk about what it means to be good, well, then you can't talk about who God is in his nature, because God is good and there's no one who is good that's not God. And so the only way that you can be good as a man or a woman is by being in Christ through faith. And then we can have all the other conversations about forgiveness, kindness, tenderness, forgiveness, long-suffering, patience, all of these things, fortitude, bravery, boldness, courage. All of those are fruits of being good. But you can't talk about being good until you first talked about the nature of God, which is he is good. But for God to be good, we cannot flinch or look away when it turns out that the word of God killed 66,000 people in one day, or killed 800 people at the hands of Eliezer in one battle. The same word of God that gave Eliezer the victory in the Valley of Lehi is the same God who overturned the tables and whipped people in the temple. That's the same God. So when God says, I'm good, and we look at his track record, and then we flinch and say, well, but that's not really good. Or God can do that stuff, but we shouldn't then do that. Well, first of all, God charged Eliezer to go and fight those 800 men that he killed. He charged David and Jeroboam. He charged all of Gideon and Joshua and Caleb. He charged all of them to go and to do what they did, and told them that they would win. He didn't say, you don't have to do this, because don't worry, I'll just go do it for you.
Right.
What he's saying is, you're going to win, but you still have to put on the armor. You still have to draw your sword, and you still have to fight, because that's your vocation.
Right.
And in your vocation, the promise will move forward. And I think then, to tie this up, what we've done is abdicated that side of what God says, which is, I'm going to give you victory, but you still got to suit up. You still have to go into the battle, and you still have to fight.
To use the picture, it's David with the Philistines in particular, not Goliath part, but when Saul's chasing him, it's like, should I go out and fight him or not? He prays, and God says, yes, go and fight him. I'll deliver him into your hands. Right. And then his men are like, no, there's no way, because we're only 400 and da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
And so then David prays again, right? And presumably prophet or whoever responds and says, no, go and fight the battle. And then, so then tells the men, and then they go into the battle. And then it's Saul Saul's coming after him, and he's like, should I go fight Saul? And God says, no, because if you go and fight him, I'm going to give you into his hands.
Right.
So then David flees, right? But it's always under the Lord's direction.
Right.
Which makes you wonder, it's like, are we just not listening? You know?
Well, also, to
are
your
we
point,
not asking even?
I think a second rail to this is that we always associate, like, love your neighbor, in this way you pour burning hot coals on his head, like burning hot coals of judgment on his head.
Love your enemy.
And we think love your enemy means therapeutic love.
Make him feel good. Make him
Again, be
comfortable.
nice. Be nice to your enemies.
Buy him some froyo.
Yeah, but how does God show his goodness to his enemies? How does God love his enemies?
He brings them into captivity.
Yeah, he annihilates them.
Sometimes they get intermarried,
Sometimes that happens too.
brought into the household. Yeah.
But we so quickly apply, again, this goes back to what Dreher says about soft totalitarianism being a therapeutic totalitarianism. Not just therapeutics in terms of like medicated, but therapeutics in the terms of just the language we use. It's soft language, like George Carlin said. It's all soft language in order to make us soft people. And it goes back to what I said about the difference between being nice and being good. When it says love your enemies, we apply a therapeutic salve to that, which it means be nice.
Well,
Love
and
your enemy.
nice also makes me think of, this therapeutic language that actually is it's almost always nonsensical. It doesn't even make sense.
Yep.
But it has an emotional effect, right?
It
they'll
makes
say-
you feel nice.
right. So there's these expressions of, or actually sad or evil or angry. I mean,
Yeah.
therapy can be used in a number of ways
Yes.
for emotional manipulation, right? And so you coin these phrases and they're supposed to give you this visceral response. But you're not supposed to step back and say, what does that actually mean?
Right.
What are you actually saying? Like anti-fascist. Like what? Okay, so you're against fascism. So I shouldn't see any fascism from you then, right? And then you start to analyze it and you're like, wait a minute. You're advocating for the thing that you say you're against.
Yeah.
So I'm supposed to have this reaction. You're anti, right? So you're, you're opposed. But you don't actually do the diagnosis and say, are you even in keeping with what your name means? Actually, words don't even matter. That's the postmodern problem, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which he goes into next.
Right.
In the chapter.
I think this is what has led to the downfall of the churches, especially in the United States, is this connotation that good is nice. Love means being nice.
You're not talking about the actual collapse of the churches. You're just talking about the collapse of faithfulness. Which the actual collapse of the churches will follow, but
yes,
there's a time delay.
Right. Well, last year we saw actually tens of thousands of churches closed last year in the United States and didn't reopen and are not going to reopen.
Not reported.
Not reported. Some were. Like, what was it, like tens of, like it was like 14 or 140,000.
Well, I remember seeing the polls where it's saying how many you expect to reopen. But I don't know if there was an actual debrief to say here's what's actually happening.
I just remember we talked about that last spring. There's like 140,000 that still hadn't opened yet and were closed.
Right.
I wonder how many of those didn't reopen. And so let's just say conservatively, 100,000-ish churches in the United States didn't reopen just because they were small churches to begin with. They didn't have a lot of resources. Maybe they're storefront churches. Maybe they met, irregularly. But there are a lot of churches that didn't reopen for financial purposes, or just like you said, they closed and the congregation never came back when they reopened. I've seen that happen in this area. But
Sure.
But it is, again, church is convenient. That's why I go to church. And when I go to church, I get that kind of emotional uplift, which is why I go to church. And I find the services offered by my church semi-valuable to me, right? There's different ministries I can jump into and volunteer for if I want to. I can participate in the music. I can attend Bible study. My kids go to Sunday school or confirmation. There's youth group. There's all these things. But they're all points of convenience that don't necessarily lead one to faithfulness.
Right.
And so we've created essentially, well, it's like I talked about the analogy of the tree with the twigs. We've snapped the twigs off the branches and then we carry them around in our hand expecting them to bear fruit. And what we haven't paid attention to is the roots.
If they ever even really belonged on the tree in the first place.
That's what I'm saying. Twigs don't bear fruit. They're just the dead ends of the branches.
Right. There you go.
And so we just snap those off and then we walk around just waiting.
Oh, you mean the stuff that we prune off is the stuff we were supposed to bear fruit?
Yeah.
The things that you normally would get rid of are the things that you expect to actually benefit you.
Right. Right. And we've talked about this in the past. You and I, when we were going through seminary, it was a big deal of, hey, your church has all these programs, but are they really Christian? Are they really necessary to accomplish the mission of the church? Or are they just ways to get people to come to church, which in the end didn't get people to come to church. It just got people from church to participate in these groups until something else came along. But again, it's that kind of like, we'll throw the net into the ocean and whatever we haul up, that's our catch.
We caught them for what? And
right.
They're there for what purpose? That we can consume them?
Right. Well, in our church body, the word and sacraments were downplayed. for the sake of outreach and evangelism. And I know
For a
you and I,
generation at least. Yeah.
yeah, for at least a generation, so that you and I, for example, were on the other side of the divide, asking the question like, but once we get them to church, what's the point?
Right.
This isn't a social club. Like, they're going to come to church and they're all excited and jacked up, and then they're going to come in and be like, wait, this is it? Like,
Well,
this
and
is all there is?
I've argued it from another angle too, is that even if that's who you want to be as a congregation, it's unsustainable in the long
Correct.
term.
Yeah.
Because you can't keep reinventing yourself.
Oh, but they'll try.
Right, but you'll have attrition every time. You might gain a few,
100%.
you'll lose some. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every time you
Which
try to repurpose, rebrand.
You end up suspended in a constant state of anxiety and fear, hoping that this one works.
Yeah. Well, isn't that what it drives it though? What works, and
Yeah.
like define work.
Yeah. What works? People are here. There's money in the offering plate. Numbers. What
yeah.
works?
Yeah.
Versus, but what is the purpose of the church's existence?
Yeah. Whereas, I mean, I guess I wouldn't say it's fatalistic, but we just, at least the way I teach it, is like, look, I'm going to do what the Lord has given me to do,
Right.
and then He's going to accomplish what He wants to accomplish with that. That may not fit any of our models or standards for what we consider to be fruitful or successful or whatever language you want to use.
Right.
In the end, it's like if He's going to do anything with us, it's going to be by His giving, right?
Right.
And that doesn't mean that we're apathetic and we don't try, right? We do what He's given us to do, and we do that faithfully and consistently, regularly, But if there's anything any benefit that we experience in our life from that, even emotional benefit, it's going to be a gift from God, right?
Well, I think that's what it comes down to right now is we've got to stop being nice and start being good.
Well, we're worried about offense.
Correct.
And rather than being worried about the offense to God's word, to God Himself.
Yeah. Well, it's like somebody asked me, he's not a believer, but he asked, he's like, so are you against abortion? And he said it in that kind of incredulous, like, I know you, we train together. Are you against abortion? I'm like, yeah, of course I am. He's like, well, how can you say that? I'm like, dude, I'm a Christian. Like, it's a foregone conclusion that I'm against abortion.
Used to be anyway.
And then his counter was, but I have other friends who are Christians who are pro-choice. And I said, then they're not Christians.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Pro-choice. I thought about that. And then if you're a bondage to the will kind of person,
correct,
you're kind of not really pro-choice in any regard. Because if
No,
you're going to choose,
exactly.
it's always going to be evil.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to always make the same choice, which is to sin against God and His word.
I've never thought about connecting those two.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But it was the incredulous, like, but how can you say that? I'm like, I'm a Christian. Like, of course I'm against death.
Yeah.
But they don't see it as in terms of life and death. They see it in terms of, well, it's just a cluster of cells.
My body,
like,
my choice, right?
Yeah, that too, which is hyper ironic this morning that the VP says one thing on that topic and the president says something on a.
You're not supposed to put those two side by side.
Well, you saw Psaki walk out because she got jammed up because it was a female reporter, so she couldn't dismiss her.
Oh,
question.
she does with the men. Oh,
Yeah. Well, you're a man, so you wouldn't know what it's like to have to make that choice. And then a woman asked it. She just laughed and walked out. I'm like, do all of you have the same nervous tick? You would laugh when you're cornered? Like, it's a terrible tell.
I don't think they care.
They don't care. Again,
Either
their
that or
arrogance is.
It's just a JV basketball team, and
Well, how about both? Actually,
they don't care, and they're inept.
Well, I think
Somebody
the fact that they're
said that
JV is what gives them that sense of entitlement because they're not good. Someone that's good at what they do isn't arrogant like that because they know they're good. They don't have to brag about it. They don't have to make a show of it.
You can actually be humble because you've earned it.
Correct. It's like I went down this rabbit hole for no reason whatsoever. But like Michael Jordan has never claimed he's the greatest of all time. In fact, when he's asked that question, he says, you can't answer that question because different players, different eras.
Even different rules. The game's not even
Different
the same.
rules. He's like, I'll leave that for other people. Now, I know from The Last Dance and his obsessive control of the entire production of that narrative in that documentary, Michael Jordan believes that Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player of all time. You know he knows that. And you know he believes that. But he's smart enough to understand that you never say it out loud because he doesn't need to. Go to the tape, right? LeBron James actually said on camera, I'm the greatest of all time, and here's why. And he got attacked for it, right? Oh, he's so arrogant. How can you say that? And blah, 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 blah. Mike would never say that. And Michael Jordan's just sitting at home smoking a cigar, just leaning back going, gotcha. You never, if you're the best, you don't have to tell people you're the best. And you know you're the best because people will argue about it. As soon as you say, I'm the best, now you're going to get that counter push of, oh, you're arrogant.
Yeah, it's
You're
just
a
not a
braggart.
good look.
It's a terrible look. It's bad for it's bad for PR, right? It's bad for the brand.
Just perform, right?
And so Jordan understands the importance of protecting the brand, whereas LeBron doesn't. It's a different generation, though.
No, he does. He talked to China.
Yes. So the point is then, like when Mike did what he did, and whenever he got heat for what he did, he was always charming and deflected, right? And the media protected him because of that. With LeBron, they don't because he's not charming. He's just, yeah, I'm the greatest. And then he complains about privilege. And it's like, dude, you were a millionaire before you graduated from high school.
That's right.
You don't even understand what it means to be underprivileged. So, and that's a gross overgeneralization, I know, but for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to make it. So the point being, though, is that you don't, if you're the JV team, you got to let everybody know that you deserve to be on the A squad. But when you're on the A squad, you don't have to prove to anybody that you deserve to be there because you're the starting player.
Right.
You're a starting center or whatever. It's only your lesser thans that are sitting there critiquing you and saying, well, I could do it. If I was center, I'd score twice the number of points.
Well, isn't that it when you distinguish yourself in terms of, class or, category?
Yeah.
And you set yourself apart from the others, then it puts you under a different level of scrutiny too.
Correct. It does because you're drawing attention to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for all the wrong reasons. There's a fly in here. And so as a consequence, by drawing attention to yourself, people look at you and go, oh, you're crying out for attention. Oh, yeah, you're not very good at your job, are you?
You don't want us to dig too deep. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, just serve humbly, meekly. Do your job.
Right.
But do your job, right? I mean,
I'm sure the worst leaders in history were really smart at branding. We think of Napoleon, for example, and we only talk about his military exploits and his what was good about him as a general and how he handled his troops. What we don't talk about is the fact that he was not really a very good monarch. Wasn't really good at running France, and ended up getting deposed a couple times as a consequence. And why do we do that? Right? Why do we selectively point out he was a great military leader, except for the whole Waterloo thing? But he wasn't really good as a civilian leader. And there's something to be learned from that. Eisenhower didn't want to be president because he was a great military leader, but he was all right as a civilian leader.
Well, I mean, the idea that you would have diversity of skill and talent that would apply to both situations. I mean, they're not the same.
Right. Exactly. But
this is what politicians make terrible, make terrible doctors. Usually.
Yeah, usually. Unless they're actually doctors. And even then, how long till they practiced? Or how long since they last practiced?
Kind of the side of it, yeah.
Yeah. So I think the degree to which we engage in critical thinking needs to be elevated significantly in the churches. And, for example, we don't have theologians of the church anymore. Not really. Like in circuits, let's say locally, we don't have pastors that we lean into because they're a scholar in this one area. It's like if I was in your circuit, we need like a Hebrew guy who's going to come and lecture on Hebrew. We need a Greek guy. We need a church history guy. We need a systematics guy, maybe a pastoral care guy, maybe a preaching guy.
Well, at least in my case, they got rid of focuses. You didn't have focus. It was all gen. It was basically like pastoral gen ed.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a vocational institute. It's just like
comprehensive education. And
let's just get your generals out of the way, get you a diploma, and get you in the parish as soon as we can. And that changed just because the seminaries felt this pressure from, I don't know where, maybe the congregations, to just keep adding more to the curriculum. And I remember when I was at the seminary for my MDiv, it was, well, we have to keep up with the way culture is changing, and we have to keep up with, the way that people are changing in culture. So instead of one pastoral care class, we had like 4. And then Greek and
Teaching
Hebrew
pastoral
got pushed.
care in the abstract, which is always kind of strange.
So phenomenal. It's so much fun.
Thanks for the toolbox, but yeah.
Black and Decker tools. They weren't even good tools.
Right, exactly.
So then Greek and Hebrew was relegated to half semester credits, which is weird because I had Greek every morning for an entire year when I was at Concordia, Portland. And then I come to seminary and they're like, yeah, it's a half credit. I'm like, isn't this important? They're like, yeah, there's resources. There's, you have computers now. And then for systematics, we had 3 classes, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But we still had 4 pastoral care classes, and they were all therapeutic. And then there was the God and Evil class about theodicy, which was taught as systematic Christianity. But you had all these classes just thrown at you that you were expected to take because they were going to make you a more well-rounded pastor. But like you pointed out, they were all done in the abstract. And so you do like a clinical pastoral education credit, which I didn't do. That's when I opted out because I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to let a Unitarian chaplain at a hospital tell me how to be a Christian preacher. You out of your mind?
Or how to provide care to those in distress. Yeah.
Yeah. So you see the watering down of the seminary curriculum, and you see the pressure that's put on pastors to, again, maintain the status quo when they get to a church.
But isn't that that's just therapeutic.
Exactly.
This idea. Don't cause any problems. We don't want people to get upset because that will make them feel
keep
bad.
Everybody happy.
Right.
It's all about feelings at this point. And so the way that you run Sunday school is to make sure that the parents of the kids are happy, learning what the parents expect. Confirmation is about keeping the parents happy and teaching the confirmands what the parents expect. Bible study is about making sure the Bible study class is happy and teaching them what they expect and not arguing,
or
not
what they're
pushing them too
interested
hard.
in, what they ask for.
What they're interested in, which, by the way, would be the book of Revelation constantly.
Yeah, except when you do it, they don't actually show up.
They don't show up, and then they do, and you explain it.
Oh, because they realize that when you teach Revelation, it's not going to be that like Nostradamus or something.
Well, it's not going to be, let's read this book about the book of Revelation. Let's actually read the text. Because it's weird when you actually read the text of Revelation, it's not that baffling. Jesus wins.
Right. And if you treat it as actual historic data.
Yeah.
That's under the guise of like narrative, kind of like Alice in Wonderland, right? Which is...
Well, when it comes to apocalyptic literature, we're all Baptists. Like, everybody just wants it to be about now and apply it now. And just, hey, pastor, just point out how all these things in this book are going to come true in real time so we can watch it happen.
But as we said during the show proper, the expectation of demonic assault is going to be consistent. And so we're going to see those patterns repeated, just in different ways.
So here's the thing about that, right, is that I believe in that. But I don't think most of the people in my church do.
But that we're fighting the same kind of spiritual evil that John was seeing in the context of Rome.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure when I talk about Satan in the pulpit, they don't believe me.
Oh, that there's a deceiver?
Yeah. An actual personality, however you want to refer to a creature.
Right. Being, entity.
A being that is Satan, and that he has agency in the world, and he's the ruler of this world, and he has agents.
Well, that's the part they hate. It's like, wait a minute. I'm like, that's what Jesus says when he's during the temptation. He doesn't tell the devil he can't hand over the kingdoms to him. But he actually wins those kingdoms by defeating the devil through his death, right? He says all authority has been given to me after his resurrection. Yeah.
And I think maybe that's a great dividing line between, well, me and not everybody in my church, but, I'd love to have an anonymous poll. I'd love to find out how many people actually believe Satan is real.
Yeah.
Not just some sort of entity or abstract idea.
Well, they don't believe in hell, and at least not in the sense of, permanent anger with God.
Right. No, there's no, I think, there is no hell because in the end, everybody's going to go to heaven because in the end, everybody's basically a good person. You hear that constantly. It's again, that's therapeutics, moralistic therapeutic deism. And so
everybody gets a pass, I guess.
Everybody gets a trophy, right? This is what happens.
Even better.
Participation trophy crowd has grown up. And now this is the church in a nutshell, is everybody gets a trophy. Everybody gets a medal for showing up. In fact, here's a great analogy. So next month is Jiu-Jitsu Worlds in Texas, and I was supposed to go, and then I wasn't quite sure where things are going to be with the mandates, so I didn't sign up. But At Worlds, you show up, you fight whoever is in your bracket. And so if there's 3 people in my bracket, for example, and I lose 2 matches, I get 3rd place. I get a 3rd place bronze medal just by virtue of the fact that I'm 3rd. And what people will do is then post on social media, 3rd place at Worlds. Woohoo! Right? Thanks to all my teammates and coaches for help, putting in the work. What they won't tell you is they lost every match. And this is a participation trophy. Now, not taking away from the work they put in, not taking away from the fact that they showed up and they fought. But if you're going to lie about your medal, then you have no integrity, and everything else kind of goes by the wayside at that point because you're a liar and you're presenting yourself to be somebody you're not. You got your ass beat twice, you lost, and you got a consolation prize. Again, not to take away from the training, not to take away from the fact that you showed up, but you're lying about that 3rd place medal in order to gain social media credit, to gain, points with your girlfriend, boyfriend, people back home, family, whoever. You're a liar. But you've got that medal that you get to take that picture with, right? And I think that's what, again, society has done this to us. Everybody gets a medal, and it doesn't matter whether you won or lost. All that matters is that you got a medal. And so after that, whatever you happen to say or however you choose to edit your social media post, all that matters is you're posing on the podium with that bronze medal around your neck. It's a lie. And you're lying, but you justify the lie in order to perpetuate this myth about yourself.
Right.
And I see people doing this all the time, especially in the church.
That is what social media was engineered for.
Right.
Present the better version of you.
Right. And so our idea of eternity is everyone gets a participation trophy. Church of the Cosmic Skull is an awesome band, by the way. Don't ever knock Church of the Cosmic Skull. I love that band. Don't get me started. Tom and me are probably the only 2 people that understand what he just wrote. That's how nerdy I am. But we've essentially allowed people to get away with believing, and even we preach it. You hear pastors preach this and teach this all the time, that we do believe in universal salvation, but we're not universalists. We believe Jesus died for the sin of the world, for all people, but not all people are saved. That's the mystery of election, right?
Right.
Is that Jesus has chosen all people, but not all people receive what he offers them. And I think what has happened with moralistic therapeutic deism is that the people that want an out for themselves have given everybody an out in order to give themselves an alibi. An alibi.
You have an out as long as you participate in whatever, religious scheme they've set up for themselves.
Right.
But how dare you tell them if it's not valid or if it's not true, or if it's not actually beneficial? I'm not talking towards feelings, but towards faith and life, that kind of stuff.
Well, it allows you to participate nominally in Christian doctrine, nominally in the life of the church, nominally in your own Christian faith. Do the bare minimum, maintain the status quo, right? Yes, I know I did. And as a consequence, when the pastor does get up and say, Jesus died for the sin of the world, however, those who reject the gift, those who walk over the dead body of Christ, are doing so in order to get to hell. And like I've described in the Hebrew sense, hell is God not talking to you anymore.
Right. So
whatever Dante's Inferno imagery conjures in your head when you think of hell, it's worse than that. It's God not talking to you anymore.
Well, and I've often said it's like this, except worse.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
A lot worse. You're like, really? Oh, yeah, no, he's just going to give you completely over to everything that you want.
Right. Yeah. And so all roads lead to the DMV.
Speaking of idiocracy again.
Right. Again, don't say government funded or government run. Just put the word DMV run or DMV funded, and it explains the government and why you don't want them in charge of anything. But I think that's the fundamental, the operating premise of the church has been everybody gets a pass. But now that we're engaged in medical apartheid, medical segregation, and now that we are hyper politicized on purpose, people are now forced into this corner of, well, which side do I take?
Or if I check out, what's the consequence of that?
Yeah.
You know,
Which
sort
I
of
think
being
is why so
excluded
many
from,
Christians in particular are just taking a pass on this whole thing and saying, well, we just need to pray. We need to know that God's in control, and we just got to be nice to everybody.
let the storm blow over kind of idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And in the end,
Because that's how totalitarianism works. It just kind of blows over.
yeah, usually. And then you're excluded from all society, or shipped off.
Sure. But this is why I think in the coming years, many, many churches will survive and thrive by maintaining the status quo.
Maybe segregating their congregation into those two halves.
Well, they've already started. I already know people that are.
Oh, you mean
being
they have
told.
like the masked service and then the unmasked service?
I know churches that
Or
do vax and
Splitting the
unvaxxed.
church left and
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yep. There's some people like the unvaxxed have to sit in the choir loft or at the back, and they have to commune last. Yeah. It's already happening because they believe that going along with the state
Is godly.
is
and
godly.
God-pleasing. Yeah.
And if you point out that it's tyranny and this is totalitarianism, they'll say, "Well, what do you mean? Like Nazi Germany?" I'm like, "No, like Soviet Russia."
Well, I mean, we don't ask the fundamental question: does your body belong to the state?
Correct.
I mean, obviously, their coins do. You choose to use their currency; they can have their currency back. Fine.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like taxation, but look, I'm participating in their system, so
Correct.
there's consequences for that.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, but your body, your family,
Your children.
your family, yeah, do they belong to the state? No.
Well, according to the speech last night, both your body and your children belong to the state.
By the way, if you decide to sue your school district for whatever mandates that they want to do to your kids, legally, in most states, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
As a parent, you can't represent your own child. You have to hire a lawyer.
Yeah.
They won't.
They're
let you
counting on that, by the way.
Yeah, because that it's a deterrent. Because who's got 150 grand to spend on a lawyer, to do a civil case against your school district,
Right.
who is going to be well represented and well funded in the
Yes.
representation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if you try to do pro se and represent on behalf of your kid
You
as
can't.
a parent, you can't. Yeah,
Right.
You don't have standing as a parent.
Yeah, I know.
Figure that one out.
Well, you registered your children with the state when they were born.
Well, that's true too. Here's your
Legally.
card.
Yeah.
You've got a number. They just don't brand it on you. You have to keep it on the card.
Right. Don't laminate it, by the way. I laminated mine. Apparently that renders it null and void.
It says it right on the card. Don't laminate
I know it does. I was young.
I don't understand why you can't laminate it.
I know.
'Cause you
That's
can't
what I
tell
said
what kind
too.
of paper it is.
Well, I laminated it because I washed it in my pants. I'm like, oh, I can't let that happen.
It's kind of a
again.
pain to get a new one.
It is. I washed it. I went and asked, how do I get a new one? They told me how. I'm like, it's just easier to laminate it. They're like, well, if you laminate it, it's null and void. I'm like, really? Then why'd you give it to me on this cheap paper? Like, this is so
Bureaucracy.
dumb.
Bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy in a nutshell. So those are your choices. You either hold up your baptismal certificate or another kind of certificate.
It's true.
But you can't hyphenate your gods. You can't join the two together artificially and say, well, as a baptized child of God, I'm going to hold up this other card. This is my identity now. This is what allows me to travel back and forth.
I'm
and
an
join
American
businesses.
Christian.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, this
which
is-
I always ask is like, which flag are you going to put above the other
Right.
flag, right? If there were a Christian flag, there isn't. If you were going to have one, which flag gets to be at top? You know? And it's like, well, if you follow the code, the flag code that's established in law, the U.S. flag has to be at the top.
Right.
So they demand loyalty above whatever other loyalties you want to
I
fly.
mean, you have freedom of religious conscience in relation to the state.
Yeah.
You don't have freedom of religious worship,
Practice, observance.
observance. Yeah.
Keep
And
your
if that-
religion out of the state. Keep your religion out of your vocations, basically.
Correct. Exactly. So if that isn't a tip-off that the state doesn't value your belief system and that you need to make a choice about which is preeminent and which is your identity, which is, which defines you, then again, you've been sleeping the whole time. You've been sleeping on this the whole time. And I understand why, because the church as an institution and its organizations have perpetuated this for generations.
Well, that's why I told you about the 1976 sermon preached here, which has many things commendable in it, but that's one of the things it has.
Yeah.
Of course, is that, we're citizens of this country, and
Right.
separation of church and state is a good thing, because we
Right.
don't want the state We don't want the church invading in the state and turning the state into a theocracy. You're like, okay. But then how come the separation doesn't work the other way? Or at least doesn't seem to. Because the state seems to have plenty to say about how to practice your faith.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, then. Maybe that separation, that wall is not quite so insurmountable after all. Or it's porous. Yeah. It's porous. It's a porous wall.
I was going to say, I think that's one of those myths. Is that there's a wall.
It's like a paper mask.
Yeah, exactly. It's a paper
Keeps
wall.
the large droplets out.
That's right. Please. So I got nothing else. You got anything else?
No, that's good.
Again, it's Christ or nothing. It's always been Christ or nothing. And as Reformation Lutherans, grace alone, faith alone, Christ alone, Scripture alone. Alone, solas. So even if you're not a Lutheran, doesn't matter. It's Christ alone. Christ alone, period. Full stop.
It's all
nothing
Jesus
other.
or nothing. Yeah.
Jesus or nothing. Drive it home. Harass your pastor about it. Harass other Christians about it. It's Christ alone. And if it's not, why? Cling to Christ, cling to the gifts. Salvation is ours. We hold the field victorious. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Yeah. Amen. All right. Sorry, my computer locked up there in the middle.
No, it's no worries. I can monologue like a supervillain.
Don't you know it? Don't you know it?
Eat your member berries and remember your baptism.
Member. Yeah.
Member. Yeah, I
do like my
for those who are on the live stream and stuff, I can't. I got it. It's not in me anymore.
What, to play along to get along? You really weren't ever a play along, get along guy anyway.
Yeah, but I could fake it. I could pretend to be a team guy. But thanks, Paul. But I can't anymore just because of the just bold-faced, willful blindness on the part of the churches at this point, especially pastors. My colleagues frustrate me because they're acting as if there's nothing that's different about the world.
I mean, in one sense, I understand that approach because we do have this kind of cultural myopia, right? Isn't that what it is?
Yeah.
Myopia?
Yeah.
Where we're, like tunnel vision, I guess. Mm-hmm. Where like we really don't see the forest, for the trees a lot of times. We get caught up in the moment. I get that. But now we're talking about, 20 months. It's like, okay, do you have an assessment now, 20 months later?
Yeah. Well, what I hear a lot, and I mean almost exclusively, is, yeah, but my congregation. Yeah, but the church council. Yeah, but my elders.
Well, then you've not done your job.
Exactly. That's what I say, actually. I'm like, then you're not doing your job. You're the pastor.
I don't expect everybody to go along.
Yeah.
I actually expect probably to have some pushback.
Yeah,
but on the other hand, it's like, what are we doing here?
Right.
If we're not going to stand for the truth, then what are we standing for?
And that's a key point, I think, too, and probably the most important point is we're not doing this to be contrarians, and we're not doing this to be a hard ass about things. We're not doing this because we disrespect our fellows.
No, and I fully expect the state to be, terrible in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
And I expect the state to do what it does.
Yeah.
But for my colleagues to just bend a knee to the state because the congregation is pusillanimous and sheepish.
Especially when the lies are exposed.
Correct.
So they know they're following after lies, or they're listening to liars, and yet they still do it because they fear the repercussions. Mm.
Yeah, well, it's like I was saying in Bible study, I said the media lies, all of the media lies, and then one old timer said, well, Fox News lies too. And I said the media. I never said CNN or MSNBC.
That includes Fox News, yes.
I said that includes the media. So what you heard had nothing to do with what I said.
You heard Fox News accusing CNN.
Correct.
But I'm not aligned with Fox News. I'm not a commentator on there.
I am not endorsed by Fox News. But if they wanted to endorse this podcast and give us a little money, I might be persuaded to change my tune.
Well, I mean, that's ultimately what happens when you join one of those institutions.
You change your tune. Exactly. That's impossible for me to do that. But that's why.
Yeah, I think we've established that multiple times now.
Yeah, the corporate press is the corporate press. Again, the president of Fox News gave $500,000 to the Biden campaign.
Right. Yeah. Why would you call it mainstream? Because that's dumb.
Yeah.
There's
no
mainstream.
No.
It's corporate. It's just money.
Corporate. Well, the mainstream apparently doesn't agree with most of what's said by the corporate media.
Based off the viewing numbers? Yeah, I think that's true.
Viewing numbers and just the overall what I see on, like, again, I have friends on both sides of the political spectrum, and none of them have anything to say kindly about corporate media.
Well, like, and I don't understand why people still give them credential. You know, you're like, well, Joy Reid on MSNBC says,
Yeah.
and you're like, she doesn't
Who
even get
cares?
100,000 viewers.
No.
Not even, you know, there's YouTube like amateur commentary,
Yeah.
political commentary I watch on YouTube
Right.
that gets more than 100,000 views.
Yeah. Right.
She's not relevant.
Right.
She's relevant to
I
some
watch
class
people
that
on
watches her.
YouTube that they literally are just talking into their MacBook computer
Right.
camera. They'd have no setup whatsoever.
Right.
They're like, they've got a white apartment wall behind them. Nothing flashy at all. It's just gross, right? Just the bare minimum, who have hundreds of thousands of views. I'm like,
Because it's
you're
content over quality. Right.
Exactly. And it's like, you're irrelevant. You're like, well, so-and-so. I'm like, you know who cares? You. That's it. You have to justify the fact that your entire system is imploding.
But views doesn't necessarily indicate, because there's bots and trolls and things, but
Sure.
it doesn't necessarily indicate popularity. But on the other hand, you're like, an institution like CNN has very deep pockets.
Yeah.
Well, at least
Well, they're being subsidized by the CCP. That helps.
they're being subsidized by somebody who has deep pockets. That's right.
Yeah.
Because they were bankrupt almost before
Right.
Mr. Trump got elected. Wow.
Right.
Brilliant. That was a good move.
Right. That's how they're able to keep going, is because they're propped up by wealthy interests who benefit from them being a mouthpiece of the state. Well, technically the intelligence community at this point. But
Or is it actually true that the corporate media, actually corporations in general, are actually the ones running the show? That it's corporate interests that are running it, not political
well, the
interests.
corporate media is not running the show. They're as inept as it gets.
No, they're just mouthpieces.
I mean, obviously, Big Pharma. I significantly underestimated the influence of Big Pharma.
Yep.
I
And
knew they were
also,
influential. I just didn't realize how. I thought for sure there were other interests that were more powerful.
also these large investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard.
BlackRock and what's the other one? Vanguard.
Vanguard, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's weird because they're incestuous. So
Yeah.
a lot of Vanguard's owned by BlackRock and vice versa.
Right.
I don't understand how this works, but this is
I'm sure it all has to do with money laundering.
the money moves back and forth, properties move around.
But a lot of the people on one board are on the board of the other, or subsidiary boards.
Right.
There's a lot of incest going on there, corporate wise.
Oh, by the way, the lithium mines in Afghanistan. Guess
Yeah.
who's owning interest in that?
Gates.
No, HB.
Really?
Yep. Through an investment firm, the CCP, primary investment firm that he's got a lot of money in. Yep, it's Biden. It's a Biden money.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Those mines are owned. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
there's always enrichment. Here, buy some artwork.
Right. Exactly.
We need to do more of that.
You can't win.
And then anonymous buyers spend millions of dollars. Thank you.
I don't know. We need to go back to the days of the city state. I was watching a documentary on Sparta.
I think
again
that's the
this
key.
morning.
That's the key. Just, break some of this up, smaller subsidiary groups, and
Yeah.
this faux like federalism. I don't. It's a waste of time.
I don't think it. I don't know. We're so
I'm
fragmented.
not necessarily prepared to move. That's the problem. It's like I might be in
Yeah.
a state that doesn't want to go or wants to go a different direction.
Me too.
Well,
I might
you
have to move
definitely.
an hour in one direction or the other. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know what to say though, because I'm called to serve my congregation.
that's true.
People have asked me that because I wanted to go back to Mexico before
Yeah,
last year and
But
live there
I don't
permanently.
know. I think you can live in opposition. You just have to be willing to suffer whatever comes.
Well, that's what Annie and I talk about all the time, is what we're willing to suffer and what we're willing to put the kids through. And is there going to be a time when those, FEMA does what FEMA does, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we got about a month.
Camo and face paint. I mean, it worked
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, true.
You have these
But yeah, I mean,
feral
we're-
kids living in the woods.
It's true. But I mean, where we're at, we're already a kind of functioning anarchist
Mm-hmm.
community.
Yeah.
And so the pressure here from locals is, as long as you stay out of my business, we don't have a problem. But like we were talking about yesterday, that's fine until they're at your door.
Right, but that's the goal. I mean, they're going to keep ramping this up with as minimal amount of effort as possible, but ultimately to create crisis,
Yeah.
to create a clash.
Yeah.
Because then, in the midst of the either chaos or just warfare, then you step in and you.
Well, that's what I mean by city-states
Take over.
almost, though, is that where I live at in Webster, the people that are moving to this area are moving here specifically because they're against all of this.
They want to get out of town. Yeah.
They want to get out of town so that they can be free to collect their own water, raise their own crops, live the way they want to live. And they don't want to mask. They don't want to get vaxxed. They don't want any of that. So, you know, the counter to that then is, well, as people move into the cities to become more dependent upon the state, those who are moving out of the cities are doing it so they're less dependent on the state. And therefore, you're going to create these communities of people who are openly antagonistic and hostile toward the state. So then local law enforcement, for example, same basic setup. You're either down with this community and its ethics and morals, or you better find another job because we're not going to put up with this. Those are your two options.
Yeah. Well, that's disappointment. You know, you disappoint them.
Correct. And that's kind of what's already started happening with the local PD is, you know, I get that you have, you know, your law enforcement, but you live in this community, so you better make a choice which side you're on.
Right.
And so far, they've made the right choice, in my opinion. And
Well, if they live there, they probably will. I mean, that's the key, isn't it?
It has to be, because where I live at, everybody has multiple guns and dogs. You know, again, you drive around, there's still Trump signs up where I live at.
Same here.
Like people have Trump flags up. So
Oh, ours
you
have
talk
Trump
about
one flags. I mean, they're
yeah,
actually
that too.
still
Yeah, there's a lot of those
sticking
around
it-
here too. Yep.
Sticking it in your
So
finger in your face.
if you thought that the Democrats were pissed off in 2016 about not my president, you have no comprehension if you haven't driven around rural America and how angry people are about last year.
2017.
And they're not going to let it go. Absolutely not. Because if you ask someone where I live at, did the Democrats steal the election? Yeah. That's the answer. Yeah. There's no
didn't- I don't think
argument, just yeah.
You probably didn't see it. I think I posted on Facebook. I don't know why I still use Facebook, but whatever. The stats from a YouGov poll in 2017, and it was exactly the same proportions, except the exact opposite as this year.
Yeah.
So 86% said that Trump stole the election of Democrats.
Yeah.
And then independents, it was like 50-50.
Right.
And da-da-da. You're like, so basically the same thing that happened then, it's just flip the
exactly.
teams.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, I mean, I think things are a little bit different this time, and people are actually doing work to
Right.
actually evaluate the validity of these elections, which we didn't really. You just had a bunch of people blowing
Right.
loud noises and whistles and things.
Right.
In 2017, didn't actually do anything. Well, maybe they did, and they didn't. It wasn't public.
Well, let's be honest. You can't win an election without cheating. This is historically true. There's never been an election in this country that was not jerry-rigged.
In some way.
Yeah, in some way, shape, or form. There was ballot harvesting. Dead people have voted.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Playing fast and loose with the rules. It's a part of politics.
I've argued since at least, I mean, my personal experience is at least since 2000, right? So.
Oh, yeah.
Hanging
But
chads
go back to the
and whatnot.
Civil War and look at the elections before, during, and after the Civil War.
Yeah.
Go back and look around, around 1812-ish or so. It's the same complaints. It's always the same complaints. And back then, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have, each precinct.
Right. I mean, the goal is that you minimize the fraud.
Right. Whereas this time, they didn't.
No, you maximize it.
You maximize the fraud. So everyone's like, hey, wait a minute. There's not that many people that live in this county.
Whatever. Just look the other way. It's okay.
Yeah, look there. Exactly. And I think that, too, then, is what has led to, again, in my area, talking with folks, the boomers still believe in the GOP if they're Republican. But most people our age and younger, the Gen Xers and younger, they don't believe in the GOP either, though. It's not as if they're saying, and this is, I think, the difference, is that for no matter how you cut it, Trump tapped into populism. He's not a populist, but he tapped into it. And he was smart about that.
It doesn't really matter what he personally believes.
That's what I'm saying. And I'm just saying to qualify it so that I don't seem like I'm a Trumper, but he tapped into something, just like Reagan tapped into the religious right. And
Yeah, different kind of populism, but
right. Is that
Till he got shot and then he went off the rails.
there's that. Or he just his true person came out after that. Point being though is that for that reason, then when I look at Republicans whether state Republicans or federal Republicans, whenever they're on social media, whenever they show up to speak, it's Republicans that are attacking them.
Yeah.
It's not the wingnut libs that are showing up to protest and throwing stuff at them. It's their own constituency that are attacking them.
Yeah.
Saying,
The more libertarian minded of them don't usually get elevated to the national level.
Right.
If they make it that far, it was a mistake.
Right.
An accident.
And the overall sentiment is, why are you complaining? We elected you. Do something. Why are you complaining to us about how bad it is? You're in charge.
Yeah, but it's that public opinion thing that I was talking about.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, pass the bill, file the charges.
Yeah.
You know, do
something.
take some action. Yeah.
Because otherwise, I think what you'll end up with is that.
Because it just breeds apathy otherwise.
Exactly. I think that's the point, is that where I live at, people look at it and be like, never voting again.
I was kind of apathetic until this last election. I thought maybe there was a chance that.
You and me both.
I did. I thought there might be a chance.
We hoped we'd kick the football this time, and she pulled it back at the last second.
Or maybe the whole thing will implode, which actually works pretty well for the anarchist mind.
Well, it does. It does.
So maybe this is exactly the way it was supposed to go, so that we could blow the whole thing up.
Yeah.
I don't mean that metaphorically, by the way, in case the censors are listening.
YouTube, metaphor, analogy, word pictures. Oh, Gillespie, you homeschooling extremist Christian.
We're kind of pacifist, actually.
It's true, you are. You're a very pacifistic family.
We're not passive, but we're pacifist.
Yeah.
That couldn't cause any problems. Just leave us alone.
Just love everybody, man. Just love everybody.
My kid works for a hippie Tibetan pizza maker. So
there you go. See, it's all good.
He's not.
Yeah,
Tibetan,
I think in the end,
Tibetan.
Either the church figures it out real quick, because I think we're reaching that tipping point where you either gotta figure out where you stand, and by not taking a stance, you are participating in tyranny. And it's not good for the institution to call that out. It's obviously not good for other pastors to be called, complicit in tyranny. But like with, Kolakovic, that's what he did. He just looked at the institution and went, yeah, I can't work with you anymore.
So regardless of what happens, since they're trying to project a future and we don't know what it is, regardless of what that looks like, we know what we need to do in order to respond.
Right.
And be prepared for whatever eventuality.
I think that's,
because we already have those tools.
That's the point of social media for me is I'm so focused on what's happening locally for me. I'm taking care of, my congregation, my family, my students, local community. And then I go on social media and I get yanked out of that. And so my anger and my frustration towards others is not usually local. It's once I go on social media.
It's those people.
Well, it's things that are out of my control.
Mm-hmm.
I can't
But they're kind of fun to complain about, though.
Not so much that. It's heartbreaking for me to see other people that are being bulldozed by these things and are helpless because they are peasants. And it makes me remember, you're a peasant too.
Like the Australia folks or,
Yeah, well, just people I know personally that are around the country that are going through this kind of ostracization.
You and I both get the emails.
Yeah. And so I see
we don't know what to do. We don't know. We got to push back, but we don't know how to push back.
Well, that too. It's like I want other I want other parents to join together with me so we can go to the school board meetings and, hey, look, we're united on this. But I can't get the other parents to engage because they don't really care. And they're like, just get the shot. It's not that big of a deal. I'm sure they've got it figured out by now. And my heart breaks for them because I get it, and I wish everybody could just pull their kids out of school and homeschool them. And that would be the strongest message of all, because in a capitalistic society, money, it's all about money.
Money talks.
And so to watch businesses go under because same reason, and then you watch other businesses go under because they chose to comply. And I feel bad for them in a sense too, because it's like you were trying to do what was best for your business because you needed to do what's best for your family, but you chose the wrong side. And so now you're going to be punished for that economically.
Right.
And you're probably going to have to leave this community now. And so that's hardship on you. And all of it is heartbreaking because, well, in the end, all you can do, facetiously saying that, is pray.
Yep.
So, yeah, homeschooling is way up in Lockport, New York. It's way up here too. Like I said, we were going to do seminars this month just to help people, or last month just to help people figure out homeschooling.
Not as much here, and I think it's because the school decided to take a more parent-centered approach. Parents are going to decide, but they're struggling with it now because they've had a couple cases already in the first week.
Oh no, God forbid! In the first week of school, the flu broke out. Weird.
Yeah, exactly. And they're
Who
like,
would have thought?
well, these kids, they have the same story. They came to school even though they didn't feel well, and they should have just stayed home, and then we wouldn't have had the exposure, and blah blah blah. Like, you're going to keep chasing this?
Yeah, exactly. For years, you said if they don't have a fever, they can come back to school. And now you're saying 14 days.
Now, if they have the sniffles, they can't come back.
Right. It's like, wow. Is that all it took? Really?
You don't want grandma to die.
Because, again, the future is closed. I get it.
The kids in Africa they're starving because you're not eating your food.
Right. Yep.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't think.
Wear your sunscreen so the person next to you doesn't get a tan.
Yeah. Which, by the way, sunscreen causes cancer, but just
some sunscreen. Like if you wear multiple layers of clothing, you don't get cancer.
It's a true story. Well, skin cancer.
And a hat.
And a hat. It's weird that way.
It's true. That's the best kind of sunscreen.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Tom's got a good point. A lot of this is just don't ask, don't tell. It's like at church. I can't talk about vaccinations at church because I'm going to offend certain people and encourage other people and create this division in the church then between the vaxxed and the unvaxxed, even though they're already thinking it and talking about it. But when they come to church, let's all be nice to each other and get along.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense that you don't want to burden somebody's conscience that got it and under a mistake or false premise or something.
See, I think that's avoiding the difficulty of preaching it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. That's true.
And preaching it evangelically at a certain point. You got to turn that corner and preach evangelically. And
well, I mean, it's not going to save you, and it's
not
going to condemn you either.
Exactly.
So,
but and that just goes to the level of preaching and teaching that exists in our churches, is that so many just don't even address it because they wouldn't even know where to start. I've had pastors tell me that, like, I wouldn't even know where to start with this. I'm like, well, you start with the law, and then you work your way to the gospel.
Yeah, you kind of you should know how to preach it by this point, I would hope.
Well, therapeutic preaching is what it is. Again, you can get by. It's like Nestigan always said, you can get by with law preaching 80% of the time. 80% of the time you can preach just law. Your congregation will be more than happy with you for preaching.
As long as it doesn't sting too much.
Yeah. But as soon as you preach the law lawfully and it has bite to it, or there's a crisis, now all of a sudden they don't want to hear the law anymore. They want a different word.
Oops.
Yeah. And so as a consequence, you get in that habit of preaching therapeutically, and then all of a sudden people don't feel good anymore. And they don't feel safe anymore. And they're uncomfortable. And they're struggling. And pain is bad, and they're experiencing pain. So you need to fix this. And of course, God can't fix their pain because, well, pain is a gift from God, the gift of suffering. And we have an example of that somewhere.
No, but there's a pill for that. I'm sorry.
What's his name? The one dude in the Bible.
Pain and suffering? Job?
Jesus.
Jesus. Okay.
Who actually baptizes our suffering. We don't preach on that. We don't teach it. And therefore, when it happens, all we're left with is therapeutic language, which has no gravity to it, has no weight, has no power behind it.
Temporarily.
It has the power of, it's like when I eat popcorn, I love popcorn, but it just makes me hungry for food.
It's not food. No.
It's not food. It's just a snack. It's just something you eat because it tastes good, but you know it's empty calories. And then I'll get done eating popcorn and I'm kind of full from the popcorn, but I need to eat sustenance, like nutritive-rich food. So then I eat something that's nutritive-rich and now I'm bloated and I'm cursing myself for the popcorn.
You're supposed to eat the regular food first and then have the popcorn for the snacks.
I know. I also eat dessert first at Thanksgiving. That's who I am.
But it's Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I know, of course. But that's what people want when they come to church on Sunday. They just
all
want
feast?
that. All dessert.
All dessert. Okay.
It goes back to what you're saying about heaven and hell and judgment. Yeah. We just want dessert. Just we're coming to church on Sunday for dessert. And then if you don't give it to them, they get mad at you. It's like I've lost jujitsu students because I didn't teach them the sexy stuff. And it's like, well, first of all, you don't even know the fundamentals. And second of all, that sexy stuff, that works 1% of the time, if that.
Right.
So when you're 5-6 years down the road in your training and you've nailed the fundamentals and you've got that, I'll give you the sexy stuff. But that's just dessert. You need meat and potatoes. You don't need dessert. But everybody, of course, when they start something, they just want dessert because it's sexy. It's, ooh, look at that. It's like, yeah, it's pretty impressive that this dude that's been doing this for 20 years was able to pull that off, but you've been here a month. Let's get you to figure out how to stand without falling over.
Yeah.
And so what I realized,
what
I realized then from coaching and teaching in jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai is people that have been coming to church, for 80 plus years are still first month beginners when it comes to Christian doctrine. But they still want dessert. It's like, you don't even know the fundamentals of your faith, but you're telling me that you want dessert every Sunday? This is why you don't come to church regularly. Because you don't have any foundation.
Right.
The people that have a good foundation, they're the ones who come to church every Sunday. And they're the ones who hold me accountable.
Yeah, and I think it's probably because it's less about you and it's less about them and it's more about, well, Jesus.
Yeah. Well, they're at least aware of the fact that they're wrestling against themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Versus those who are like, yeah, I'm just here for my God time. I'm here to worship God. I came in feeling this way. I expect to leave feeling much better. So give me a good word. Give me something that makes me feel good.
Yeah, good luck with that. Or sing something that makes me feel better.
Or sing something that makes me feel good. Give me something that's uplifting emotionally.
Yeah, we've lost that loving feeling.
Right. And so I don't care about the substance of the sermon. I don't care about the substance of Bible study. I don't care about the substance of the hymns. All I care about is, how does it make me feel?
Thus, I get upset when it's too long.
That too. Yeah. It's crazy.
I have tolerance levels here.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you can complain about it or you can preach to it. So I preach to it.
There you go.
Because listening to a bunch of old pastors sit around getting drunk and complaining about their churches, I got tired of that real fast.
It's never fun, and it's only tolerable in limited doses.
For you.
I know.
I can't.
I'm still trying to keep the premise up that, there's a fraternity and a collegium.
There's really not. There's not. There's not.
Fake it till you make it.
Well, you went to the seminary though.
That's true.
So at least you see people that you know from seminary. So you can pretend that you have that fraternity with them because you graduated together or something.
Well, that's true. I actually do.
I don't have that, so I don't feel beholden to play that game. But anyways, I suppose it's time for tacos. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Thanks for listening to the live stream.
A little extra bonus time on the live stream.
Shoot 1517 an email letting them know that you actually like the podcast and like what we do on the show and you want to see more of it. Because as always, your support is what keeps this podcast going. It's all about listener support at this point. And,
I got to point the right way. Is it this way? That way. Subscribe. Like. Click the bell. Share. All the YouTube stuff.
Kind of there, but then
hey, we went over 300 subscribers, and I think it'll start syncing over to
Odyssey.
I started to sync to Odyssey, which is
Sweet.
blockchain based. Yeah, I haven't. I don't know what'll be the next video. Last time I checked, there were 2, and they were short, so I don't know what's going on there. But someday they may sync over, and it'll be cool.
Yeah, I like it.
We can always you can actually stream there. Too.
I dig it.
Yeah.
Again, we're not here to tell you what you like to hear, but we're also not here to tell you what you don't like to hear. We're here to make you think and to get you to think. Whether you agree or disagree, that's your choice. But at least I hope we get you to think about your presuppositions and why you believe what you believe and how you interface with your church and with your culture.
Diagnosis,
exactly. And
then application.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.